And we are live. Hello everyone. Up, let me put my headphones. Hello everyone, how are we doing on this fine Tuesday? Welcome for the news review of the week. Up, let me place my glasses of water where I need to place them. So yeah, welcome for today's news review. On the menu, what do we have? We're going to talk about China, as we kind of do often these days, because it's kind of the elephant in the middle of the room. So we're going to talk about China and the trade issues that it has with the EU. And then I picked like several topics where I don't have like, usually I try to have like 2 articles per topic. This time I will like front load with quite a few articles on China first, and then like the other 3 topics is just 1 article. But topics were interesting, or things that we don't discuss necessarily often, or not as often. So I figured it would be a good opportunity to talk about it. So we'll talk about the EU migration policy, the migration and asylum pact that is coming into force finally, and so an article looking at these rules and okay, are member states actually ready to implement them, to actually apply them in practice? Then we'll read an article about the European system for petitions, like that allow, like, so the European Citizen Initiative, that basically is a petition where if 1 million people sign it, the topic is put on the agenda, and the Commission and the Parliament has the obligation to tackle it. So it was implemented to kind of boost the implication of citizens and introduce some level of direct democracy to a certain extent, to a very small extent. So we're gonna look at what were the results of this ECI since its introduction, whether it's successful given its objectives or not. And to finish, we're going to read an article about the far right, and specifically an interview that Politico did with one of the main person in the Patriots, so the far right group in the European Parliament, that is strategizing how to break the cordon sanitaire, so the firewall between the far right and the let's say the mainstream parties, or political groups rather, in the European Parliament, and now they try to break through by entering collaboration with the EPP. So usually we have the perspective of the EPP. This time we have the perspective of the far right. And yeah, that's gonna be the program for today. As usual, if there are other topics you want to discuss, well, you have 10 fingers and a chat, so you let me know, and yeah, we just talk. So up, without further ado, let's jump right in and talk China. Alright, so first article is a bit the I told you so moment of von der Leyen. Von der Leyen has been talking about economic security for quite a while, actually, since the previous mandate, and she has been talking about China quite a bit, and directly targeting China even, and making the let's say the strategy of the EU evolve a bit. And before, the strategy of the EU was to say, okay, the China is a partner, it's a competitor, and it's a systemic rival. And von der Leyen has been increasingly saying, okay, it's becoming more and more a rival than a partner, and so under the name of economic security, we should tackle it seriously. Back then, she was also under big pressure from the Americans, who are very much in a de facto conflict. Or conflict, it's a strong word, but how can I challenge, seeing their status as a global hegemon being challenged by China, and so trying to get the Europeans to sever their links with China, and so von der Leyen has been going on a stronger, let's say, position against China since she became a Commission president, and so we'll discuss about how she warned Europe about it, and how the national leaders were kind of mostly looking the other way because it was suiting their national interest to increase their links with China. So von der Leyen warned about China, Europe didn't listen, will it now? So 3 years ago, Ursula von der Leyen set an assertive tone in a landmark speech about EU-China relations. Today, she is on the verge of turning her words into action. But a formidable challenge remains in her way. Out of all the speeches that Ursula von der Leyen has ever given, there is one that resonates to this day, perhaps louder than ever before. More than 3 years ago, in March 2023, the President of the European Commission delivered a landmark, wide-ranging address dissecting the state of EU-China relations, which she described as the most intricate and important anywhere in the world. Back then, it was rare for an EU leader to focus a public intervention exclusively on China, as Russia's war on Ukraine dominated the political agenda. In fact, von der Leyen devoted the first part of her address to castigating Chinese President Xi Jinping for his no-limits friendship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. So that's something that we know ever since the start of the war in Ukraine. Russia, to compensate the fact that it became like a persona non grata for a good chunk of the world, increased its relationship with China, dubbing the no-limits friendship, which is de facto a form of economic vassalization of Russia to the benefit of China, because Russia depends now to a large extent on trade with China to function. So her main grievances, though, lay on the economic front. Von der Leyen spoke at length about China's distorting subsidies, unfair competition, coercive practices, growing imbalances, forced technology transfers, and monopoly of critical raw material, all of which, she said, required a brand new approach, de-risking. So de-risking, what it is, so you always add two trends when it came to the notion of reduce, or in this case China, but even like to reduce your dependence on any given country, de-risking and decoupling. De-risking is, okay, I have relations, I have links with that country. Those links do not need to be cut, but in some areas where these links can become problematic because there are dependencies that the other country will exploit to put political pressure on me and impose their agenda on me, I should reduce maybe the importance of these links, or at least put safeguards to avoid those risks becoming a reality. So you maintain the relation, but you put safeguard, knowing, okay, we know they completely among friends there. Decoupling is one step further, is saying, okay, we seek to completely cut as much as possible our links with the other country. So you're trying to actively cut to zero, if possible, as much as possible, your links with the other country. The US has been pushing heavily for decoupling, basically saying, okay, you have to sever your links with China. We're trying to reduce and sever our links with China because China is not a partner, it's a rival, and there's nothing good can come out of active cooperation with them. So we need to we need and you need also to decouple from them. The EU instead has chosen the intermediate solution of de-risking, saying, okay, we still have links with China because those links make sense in a number of areas, economic, cooperation in some policy area, etc., 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 etc. But we acknowledge that China is not necessarily does not necessarily have good intentions towards us, and so we need to put safeguards to avoid that blowing in our face. And so since then, the EU has been pursuing this approach of de-risking instead of the triptych partner, competitor, and rival. That was kind of the definition of the EU-China relation until then. Ironically, this approach of de-risking, which started with China, to a certain extent is coming to the relations with the US as well. Ever since the re-election of Trump, the EU is actively trying to de-risk to a certain extent its relation with the US. To an extent, nothing comparable with China. The Europeans are still keen to have quite a lot of links with the US, but, you know, put in some safeguards here and there because we need to become more independent, etc., etc. So this friction point, all these are basically all the points that she listed are the ways that the Chinese government manipulates and weaponizes its economy towards the outside, because China has been creating what is called overcapacities, meaning that it boosts its own economy, its own industry by basically bankrolling its industry to allow them to produce way more that they are capable of absorbing nationally, that the Chinese market is able to absorb, and to basically flood the market outside in order to kill any kind of international competition and keep the Chinese industry rolling. Which of course is having detrimental effects on everyone out there because, you're on the receiving ends on a market being flooded, and on top of that, the Chinese government illegally supporting its industry to enable them to kill the competition, and politically weaponizing the monopoly on critical raw material, the technology transfers, etc., etc. So increasingly, we're saying, okay, that's going to blow in our face, and so we are starting this strategy of de-risking. So these friction points are now at the center of a fast-moving reckoning inside the Commission as the glut of low-cost import from China strangles the European economy, destroys jobs, and shuts down factories. Fears of deindustrialization, which are today widespread across Europe, were not explicitly featured in her speech, but the scope of the threat was made unequivocal. We can expect to see a clear path and push to make China less dependent on the world and the world more dependent on China, she said. The imperatives of security and control now trumps the logic of free markets and open trade. Basically, the good old days where, we're going to boost our economic growth by trade with China, Germany, Spain, those days are over. We need to wake the fuck up and look at it through the lens of security and economic security. The 36 minutes long speech was greeted by analysts and commentators who praised it as a matter-of-fact, clear-eyed analysis, and excoriated by Chinese officials who denounced it as misleading and incoherent. But neither of them was von der Leyen's prime audience. Her words aimed at those who ultimately hold the cards, the member states. We need the collective will to respond together, she said. Ironically, it was member states caught up in their perennial disagreements over Beijing that did the most to undercut core messages. Picture of the trade between the EU and China. We import way more than we send to China. So if you do the difference between what we send to China and what we buy from China, we are in a deficit of over 360 billion. Get the fuck away, I've asked. What year was that? 2022? Oh, interesting. Why the sudden jump in 2022? Like, is it the war in Ukraine that is doing this? But I don't see why it would do that. I mean, unless the closing of the Russian market meant that you went... they went for China instead? I don't know. I don't know. But you see, like, we've been in a deficit with China for the past 10 years, but in 10 years, we more than doubled the level of dependency over China. So Van der Leyen why also that much, because you have countries that have heavily chosen a economic strategy to rely on China. Whether Germany is the prime example of that, but not only. Spain is heavily now seeking to increase its trade with China. You had Hungary that was getting, it was more on the side of investment. They were welcoming tons of investment from China. So you had a bunch of countries that heavily invested into trade with China, and now that is blowing up in our face. So Van der Leyen's plea to diversify trade was largely brushed off, worsening the lopsided trajectory that began during the COVID pandemic. 2025 marked the first time on record that every single member of the bloc posted a trade deficit with Beijing. Governments never agreed on a common understanding of what de-risking meant in practice, with some shifting responsibilities to private companies. So it's not up to the state to decide, it's up to companies to individually say, oh, okay, I'm going to reduce my exposure to China. So shifting responsibility to private companies, which did not see the financial incentive of moving away from China and footing a higher bill. Meanwhile, a call for bolder and faster use of trade tools yielded mixed results. On the one hand, the Commission succeeded in imposing extra tariff on Chinese electric vehicles after a contentious process that sharply splitted member states. Basically, it was France versus Germany on that front. France was pushing very hard to have the Commission intervene and sanction notably the illegal subsidies that China was doing to the benefit of its car industry, while Germany was dead against any kind of intervention, because again, their car industry is very exposed to the Chinese market, and so they were afraid that if the EU was doing anything against China, well, their companies would be the first one being sanctioned by China in return. And in the end, France won that battle, in the sense that the Commission did indeed end up imposing tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. China again. Spain flipped from in favor to abstention after the Prime Minister visited Beijing. Again, because Spain is in this strategy now of increasing its trade with China. Von der Leyen's home country, Germany, moved aggressively to form a majority against. The executive also unveiled initiatives to boost domestic production in certain sectors and exclude China's Huawei and ZTE from connectivity infrastructure. So there, it's about securing the 5G networks, basically. On the other hand, the Commission failed to convince member states to grant it greater powers to control sensitive exports, which capitals jealously guard. Von der Leyen's economic security strategy came and went, and a eye-catching pitch for a new tool to screen outbound investment was abandoned amid political backlash. Basically, what the Commission and Von der Leyen proposed was to say, okay, we need, as the Commission, to be able to kind of veto some investments, meaning that if a company is doing an investment in China, it should be prevented if it touches on certain key and very sensitive technologies, AI, chips manufacturing, and that sort of thing. So a very advanced kind of thing that potentially could be used against the EU later on. And of course, member states were not so keen on creating a precedent where the Commission could veto investments in China, and B, they didn't want to piss off China by taking such measures. The anti-coercion instrument, partially designed with China in mind, has yet to be triggered despite von der Leyen herself openly accusing Beijing of blackmail. So the anti-coercion instrument, that's something we have discussed quite a bit when it was the relaunch of the trade war with the US. The ACI is also dubbed the trade bazooka. The idea being that if the EU sees a country trying to bully Europe economically by imposing sanctions to obtain political decisions, for instance, China blacklisting or blackmailing one country because of its Taiwan policy, for instance, Lithuania, or the US triggering a trade war to obtain concessions. In response to that, the Commission, pending a majority of the member state, could basically put a gun on the table and say, okay, either we find a deal to stop your bullshit, or I will use all kinds of methods to pretty much nuke your economic footprint in the EU. So that means that if the trade bazooka was to be used, the EU could decide, okay, I'm imposing tons of tariff on the goods and services you export to the EU. I'm preventing you and your companies from competing in public procurement contracts. I'm reducing the level of protection of your IP. Tons of things that basically is aimed at inflicting a maximum economic damage to the country that is seeking to blackmail Europe through the economy. So while the tool exists, it was never used because, again, member states are not so keen on putting the gun on the table, whether on China or on the US. We've come late to the discussion, a diplomat admitted. China has been thinking about economic security for 30 years. This is new for us. Admittedly, the big speech fell short of delivering. But the diagnosis has been retrospectively vindicated, said Fabienne Zuleng, the chief executive of the European Policy Center, who was in the front row when von der Leyen delivered the address. She recognized early that the relationship with China was no longer just about economic opportunity, but also about vulnerabilities, dependencies, and economic security risk, Zuleng told Euronews. But being right in the analysis is not enough, he cautioned. What Europe needs is strategic direction and consequential action. That is where progress has been more limited. The challenge has never been identifying the risks. It has been on agreeing what to do about them and being willing to bear the costs. And that's where member states are definitely not willing to bear the cost of having a stronger policy towards China. Some heeded the lessons, albeit with considerable delay. French President Emmanuel Macron and Belgian Prime Minister Bart De Wever are among those who have recently hardened their stance on China and urged stronger protective measures, echoing the assertive approach that von der Leyen introduced in her address. The rhetorical shift that has caught the Commission's attention. EU officials hope the bloc's ballooning trade deficit will create an opening for a mightier and bolder strategy to contain China before the damage, already extensive and expensive, becomes irreversible. The executive is assessing the adequacy of existing trade weapons and the possibility of devising new ones. We want dialogue, but dialogue has to deliver. We like competition, but competition has to be fair. And we want access to the Chinese market that shows reciprocity, von der Leyen said this week. It's a whole concept that we're working on. Why are we talking about reciprocity? Because China is notoriously very difficult to enter on the market. If you want to enter in the Chinese market, you need to do that at the conditions of the Chinese government. So for instance, if you want to open a factory in China, you can't do that like this. What you need to do is to create a new co-company where actually the majority shareholder is going to be a Chinese company, and you're going to own only 49% of the new plan that you're bankrolling, and you have to ensure transfer of technology, etc., etc. Which of course does not exist today. When you want to invest in Europe, you can invest. That's not an issue. Even if the Commission now wants to introduce similar policies as the Chinese did as part, in some sectors, as part of the Industrial Accelerator Act that they proposed last year. Last year or this year? When was the IAA proposed? Wait, I'm having a lapse in memory. I'm getting old. IAA proposal. Date. Let's see. No, not fate. Date. Up. Okay, no, it's really March of this year. Okay, so it's still fairly recent. Where was I? Alright. Brussels, however, is well aware that the road ahead will be fraught with difficulties. As the world's second largest economy, Beijing holds enormous sway over EU countries, with billions in goods, services, investments, and infrastructure projects at stake. Those that rely on exports see in the Chinese market a valuable alternative to the United States, where a 15% duty has made commerce considerably less attractive. Germany and Spain are under particular scrutiny for their close business ties with China. Berlin continues to send mixed signals as it balances the interest of big and small companies, which feel exposure to China differently. Big companies have used the Chinese market as an export market, while the small ones are being squeezed out by the Chinese competitors entering the European market. Meanwhile, Madrid distanced itself from a draft document signed by France, Italy, the Netherlands, and Lithuania, calling on the Commission to be more proactive against China. Von der Leyen and her team are also deeply wary of what she calls Beijing's divide and conquer tactics, which have been credited with splitting member states to derail collective action. The messy vote on the the electric vehicle tariff is remembered as a case in point. But if there is one thing that keeps government awake at night and casts a shadow over von der Leyen's grand vision, it is the threat of painful reprisal. Beijing has preemptively warned it would resolutely retaliate if Brussels beefed up its response. The EU is still reeling from the shock of last year's curb on rare earth exports, when China proved to the world the power of its invaluable choke point. Just finishing and explaining. The way the country hit back at the US tariff and held its ground until the White House gave in shows how far the communist regime is willing to go when push comes to shove. So when Trump launched this trade war on the rest of the world, and particularly targeting China, in retaliation, China decided, okay, you want to play? Let's play. I'm putting an end to or severely limiting the exportation of critical raw materials, which are very important if you want to do microchips, if you want to do drones, if you want to do missiles, if you want to do car batteries, if you want to do solar panels, that sort of thing. So pretty important, smartphones, etc., etc. So pretty important thing. And China has a de facto monopoly on this. Depending on the kind of critical raw material that we're talking about, China controls between 70 and 95% of the global market. And so, of course, when China decided, screw you, I'm putting an end to my export on critical raw material. Ragnarok. well, everybody suffered. And so that, well, China does not play and does not hesitate to use these dependencies that it created to its advantage when it has an interest to do so. Privately, diplomats admit that the prospect of a tit-for-tat is the root cause of the intractable divisions among the 27 leaders. Although they all agree with von der Leyen's grim diagnosis, they are still reluctant to apply the medicine she prescribed. The fear of retaliation is such that leaders consistently avoid mentioning China by name in the joint conclusions of their regular summits. Instead, they tackle the topic as part of a wider point on geoeconomics and competitiveness. Member states see the danger of moving individually against China and are happy to send the Commission to do the dirty work for them, a senior diplomat said, noting the alarming trade figures raise the odds but not guarantee of a new policy. It needs to be carefully orchestrated. So, in a classic EU own goal, everybody agrees with the analysis, but member states are like, yeah, but no. Because what if there was retaliation against me? It's okay if there are retaliations against others, but what about me? And so that leads us to then the Belgian Prime Minister, Bart de Wever, blasting his colleagues for their cowardice. In terms of its economic growth, Germany simply cannot afford any measures that would push it downward, not in the slightest. Indeed, that's the issue of Germany that Germany is facing, and many countries are facing in a context where the growth is not exactly great in Europe. You can't exactly afford to do worse. And when you're a country like Germany that has created by itself, it's a self-inflicted wound, that created for itself huge trade dependency on China, well, of course, any action on China is going to bite Germany particularly. The ironic thing being that Germany has created dependency for itself on China, but the damage that China is doing on the EU affect Germany particularly because it affects sectors on which Germany is particularly active. Car industry, chemical industry, steel industry, all that are very important for Germany, but at the same time, well, its car industry depends also on the Chinese market, chemical industry also on the Chinese market, etc., etc. So, damn if you do, damn if you don't. But doing nothing, definitely in the long run, that's going to blow in your face. So no matter what you do or don't do, there's going to be pain. Belgium blaming someone for being a coward for protecting their own economy. Maybe it's time to talk about the Russian money. That's a fair point. That is indeed a fair point that the Belgium that hosts the large majority of the frozen Russian funds is blaming the others for not daring to take a risk. So EU leaders running scared of China, says Belgian Prime Minister. Economic imbalances must be addressed with a proper strategy, not countless new initiatives, Bart de Wever warns ahead of the EU leader summit. Europe's leaders are increasingly wary of China and must urgently develop a serious strategy to ward off Beijing's economic domination, Bart de Wever, the Belgian Prime Minister, has warned. Europe must respond. The only question is how, said de Wever, speaking at an event organized by two pro-EU think tanks in Brussels on Tuesday. He said he was disappointed to hear that Emmanuel Macron, the French president, has reportedly launched a fresh gambit to include China in coordination efforts ahead of a G7 meeting next week, where leaders are expected to discuss Beijing's unfair trading practices. That's all very well, but we do take a lot of initiatives, and it is time to adopt a strategy, De Wever said at the event hosted by Friends of Europe and the Jacques Delors Institute. China does not take a lot of initiatives. These people have a strategy, and a strategy is going to eat our initiatives for breakfast. EU leaders will meet in Brussels on the 18 and 19 of June, a day after the G7, for a summit where China is expected to be central to the agenda, albeit not officially. They have called it geoeconomic imbalances, just not to name China by name, because we are so afraid that we don't even dare to do that, he said, before immediately asking if any journalists were in the room. De Wever is apparently known to have a very good sense of humor. The Belgian Prime Minister has been at the forefront of the debate about the devastating Chinese impact on the European economy. In March, he wrote to Ursula von der Leyen asking for the issue to be thrashed out at the highest political level. We need to acknowledge the systemic threat at the level of the European Council, so the body that gathers the aid of states and governments, the European aid of states and government, and act upon it to save our industries, he wrote in the letter obtained by Euractiv. But he said that Germany, not Belgium, was Germany, not Belgium, was more exposed to the threat from Beijing, having built its industrial economy on precisely the sectors where China is most aggressively expanding, for example, cars, chemicals, and clean tech. He accused both the US and China of using economic weapons to dominate the globe and impose conquest by dependency via economic intimidation, excessive subsidization, and protectionism. China, though, does it more subtly than Washington and poses a more acute threat, he said, warning that no market economy can replicate the scale of Chinese manufacturing underpinned by vast state subsidization. Obviously, China having a very close control over its economy, it can move the needle however it sees fit, while in open market economies, the government does not have direct control over what the economy does. So it's much more complicated for them to basically organize and direct the economy as they see fit. And to basically sponsor it through massive subsidization. It is imperative, however, not to get involved in a subsidy war with China, as Europe would likely lose a race to the bottom, the Belgian leader posited. Nor should Europe throw up protectionist barriers to trade, as that would increase prices for businesses and consumers. Instead, the Flemish nationalists subscribe to Mark Carney's, so the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney's now famous vision of Europe being part of a belt of middle powers, sticking up for the rule of law and global trading rules, and offering an alternative alliance for countries wary of the power politics of Washington or Beijing. So Mark Carney made this middle power strategy speech at Davos in February of this year as a reaction of, okay, given that China and especially at that moment, the US are going rogue, throwing out the rule book out the window, how do we answer to that? How do we maintain the rules and defend ourselves? And so he said, okay, we can't count on the superpowers anymore, be it China or the US. They decide to play aggressively with the others. So if we want to survive, we need to have all the middle power bending together and basically say, okay, the big ones want to play their own games, fine, let them do what they do, but we are going to bend together because collectively we are as strong as the US and China, and we are going to be attractive by saying, okay, we're still committing to the rule of law, we're still committing to global trade rules, and so we become attractive for all those who do not want to become vassals of China or the US. And so that middle power kind of coalition has become kind of the mantra in reaction to the bully policies of Trump in particular. Europe is suggested can be a pole star emitting the light of democracy and stability in a brutal world. For the Wever, the EU should accelerate existing trade defense instruments more assertively, diversify value chains, insist that EU companies get as much market access in China as Chinese ones do in Europe, and reduce Europe's dependency on strategic sectors. Last week, the Commission announced it is working on a new anti-China trade defense tool, which we are going to discuss right after. De Wever also told a humorous anecdote contrasting two meetings he had with Chinese envoys at the start and the end of his long stint as the mayor of Antwerp. The ambassador in the first meeting showered him with niceties, comparing their flourishing relations to a lotus flower. 10 years later, the ambassador who met him came across as his imperial overlord, threatening not to invest in the port of Antwerp unless Belgian politicians softened their rhetoric on China. If you stand divided before an empire, it is very easy to predict what will happen. So we have to respond. The question is how, he said. So Belgium being among the more Belgian critics, the more Chinese critics. Question being, how do you convince Germany and Spain increasingly to move on that side as well? Up, and to finish on EU and China, if you have questions, go ahead. Let's talk about the promises of the Commission on new tools to react to China. So Trade Commission pledges new tool to diversify suppliers and cut reliance on China. The European Commission is preparing a new tool to curb the bloc's dependence on China, with Trade Chief Maroš Šefčovič saying on Friday that companies could be required to source from at least 3 different suppliers. EU Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič pledged on Friday a new instrument designed to help European businesses diversify suppliers and prevent shortages of critical material from China. Diversification now requires a dedicated instrument, Šefčovič said at the Brussels Economic Security Forum, organized by the European Policy Center and partners by Euronews. Recent industrial cases, in particular supplies of chips and rare earth, have reinforced my conviction that a step change is necessary. His announcements follows disruptions to European strategic industries last year when China blocked exports of rare earth, essential for green technologies and the defense sector, as well as chips used by the automotive industry. However, such a move could further inflame tensions with Beijing, which has already threatened retaliation if the EU closes its market to Chinese companies. Šefčovič later told Euronews that the approach would involve requiring companies to source from 3 different suppliers, although it had still to be determined what to really do with the legal proposal. So for now, we have the concept, the details will come later. The proposal would ensure that companies do not rely entirely on a single supplier, such as China. However, EU businesses may be reluctant to support such a measure if it increases production costs. The Commissioner said economic security was a shared responsibility and that European companies should treat geopolitical risk as part of their core businesses. Basically, of course, a company will look first at the bottom line, how much does something cost me, but they need to take into account that now economic security is also a topic for everyone, and in the end, even if you take a hit to your bottom line, in the long term, that's going to be beneficial for all. industry stands on the front line. We must have we must have their back, but industry also must do its part. Basically, don't come to us crying when China is damaging you through subsidies and its the impact on the market. Also do your part to actively reduce your own dependency, because otherwise, well, you're gonna suffer in the long term. In 2025, Dutch authorities took over chipmaker Nexperia amid concerns that the Chinese owner, Wintech Technology, might relocate key operations and intellectual property to China. Beijing responded by temporarily blocking exports of chips essential to Nexperia's product and to the European automotive industry. The threats facing Europe does not stem solely from chip supplies. It also comes from the bloc's dependence on Chinese rare earth, 90% of which are refined and processed by the Asian giants. During last year's trade tension with the United States, China also halted exports of rare earths, that's what I was discussing in the previous article. Shipments resumed after several weeks of negotiations, but the truce was agreed for only 1 year, until October 2026, leaving Europe with a sword of Damocles hanging over it. Relations between China and the EU are increasingly strained as Brussels prepares new tools to protect itself from surging Chinese overcapacity. The bloc faces a record trade deficit of 360 billion euro and continues to struggle to restore a level playing field with Beijing despite sustained efforts at dialogue. At the same time, European businesses complain of unfair Chinese trade practices, while several member states, including France, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, and Lithuania, have urged the Commission to take a tougher stance through new trade defense instruments. But the two proposed EU pieces of legislation, the so-called Industrial Accelerator Act and the Cybersecurity Act, aimed at tightening access to the EU market for Chinese companies, have already drawn threats of retaliation from Beijing, raising the prospect of a trade war if the EU moves further. So again, if we do nothing, we're screwed. If we move, then trade war with China at a moment where the European economy is not doing so well and you can't rely on the US either. So damn if you do, damn if you don't. Any question on EU-China relations before we move on to a slightly different topic, migration policy. Up in the meantime, I'm just moving away a few notifications. Tac, tac, tac. Up. Okay. It's literally do or die. Yeah, pretty much. It's literally do or die. That's pretty much the case. Especially given that China has demonstrated that it has no problem using the dependencies. It's not a theoretical threat. They did it in the past. So, and it's not an actor that you can really rely on to solve stuff through discussion. All right. Up. There we go. Question being, I mean, as we discussed earlier, the problem is not the analysis. Everybody is aware of it. The question is, are member states ready to take the pain? Because it's going to be unpopular, because it means increasing costs and everything. But at the same time, it's going to blow in their face later on. But as always in politics, that's the next government's problem. All right, moving on. let's talk migration. So, at the end of the last mandate, the EU, after a long and difficult negotiation, did manage to adopt a significant reform on its migration policy, the Migration Pact, that toughened to a large extent the migration policy of the EU, the way they, particularly the way migrants are managed when they join the EU. And this policy is now entering into force, and so now it's applicable. And so the question is, are member states actually ready to do what the Migration Pact required them to do and allows them to do to tackle the surge of migration? So, as a reminder, so the asylum, the Migration and Asylum Pact, that's the official name. The principle of it is to say, okay, what do we do with people who enter the EU? The principle of that pact was to, on the one hand, strengthen the policy by saying, okay, we're going to facilitate and speed up the process to deal with migrant asylum requests. For instance, by saying, okay, we're going to look at where do you come from, and do you come from a country that mostly sees its asylum request rejected? Basically, if I remember the figure correctly, if you come from a country where more than 70% of the asylum requests are rejected, your own request is going to be fast-tracked. You're going to be speed-run because we assume that most likely your asylum request is going to be rejected, so we fast-track you, and we facilitate the fact that you're going to be in migrant camps, in controlled migrant camps by member states, so that kind of we can get rid of you. Does the Migration Pact still require national legislation for implementation? Well, technically, member state. That's the thing. Member state had until technically the 12th of June to do everything. That's why you always have a gap between the moment law is adopted and the moment it enters into force. Usually it's 2 years. That's the normal delay. In that case, they fast-tracked it. You give 2 years between the adoption of the law and the moment it enters into force to give member state the time to adapt the law into their own national laws, and also build the infrastructure, letting the sectors prepare, blah 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 blah. So you always have this delay after adopting a law before it actually enters into practice. So, but technically, from Friday, the Migration Asylum Pact is applicable. The question is, have they done the job? And so, yeah, one end, you toughen the mechanism to deal with migrants, and on the other end, to deal with the issue of what we call frontline countries, because only a limited number of countries are not the target, but are on the front line, literally, because they are the point of entry of migrants in the EU. And so we're talking about Spain, Italy, Greece, Poland, those countries, Bulgaria. Those countries are what we call frontline countries, meaning that they concentrate the brunt of the entries of migrants into the EU. And so to help them deal with this, the EU, in the Migration and Asylum Pact, introduced a solidarity mechanism that basically says, okay, if there is a surge of migrants in the frontline countries, the other EU member states have kind of an obligation to help them, either by taking on board for themselves a number of migrants. So saying, okay, Italy, you're having too many migrants at the moment because there's a surge. I'm going to take 1,200 of them and I'm going to deal with them instead of you, for instance. Or if they refuse, you write a check to a special fund that will be used to help those frontline countries pay for all the infrastructure they have to deploy to deal with migration. So it's supposed to be kind of a balancing act between the solidarity clause and also the streamlining of the administrative procedure for asylum seekers, and on the other hand, toughening the migration policy. Okay, so co-legislators agreed on return hubs on the 1st of June, so that's another part of the migration policy, preparing to roll out the Migration and Asylum Pact on the 12th of June. Stricter border controls, uniform asylum rules, and a new digital monitoring system will crack down on illegal migration. But are member states ready for the new rules? The Council and Parliament agreed on the return regulation, which streamlines return procedure and established so-called return hubs outside EU borders to host migrants without the right to remain in the EU. So that's the second part. So the thing that we're mostly going to focus on is the Migration Pact, which is what happens to migrants that arrive in the EU. What was agreed last week, on the 1st of June, is the return regulation is, okay, migrants that have come into the EU have made an asylum request. That asylum request was rejected, meaning that these people are not supposed to stay in the EU. What do we do with them? That's the return regulation. That's the second part of the equation on migration. The Migration Pact that is entering into force on Friday is only on, okay, what do we do with those that arrive? The agreement comes just before the full implementation of the EU's Migration and Asylum Pact on the 12th of June, introducing a new system for migration, asylum, border management, and integration. The pact came into force in 2024, starting a 2-year transition phase, but national governments are now required to implement it. The pact introduces efficiency into the system according to the European Union Agency for Asylum. The measures target external borders, common asylum procedure, burden sharing among member states, and international partnership to fight illegal migration. Civil society groups have expressed concerns about migrants' rights, while Magnus Brunner, Commissioner for Internal Affairs and Migration, stated that the agreement demonstrates that we are getting our European house in order. The EU faces a deep structural immigration bottleneck. Eurostat reports 4.2 million regular immigrants annually from non-EU countries, while so those are there legally. Yeah, regular migration, while 1.6 million Europeans emigrate. In 2025, over 669,000 first-time asylum applications were logged across the EU. Frontex also reported more than 178,000 irregular entries. So you have 4.2 people entering the EU legally, and you have 178,000 that entered illegally, according to Frontex. The systemic failure lies in the repatriation rate. So the people that are not supposed to be there and that you send home. That's repatriation. In a typical quarter, EU states issue about 117,000 formal orders to leave, yet only 33,000 or 34,000 people actually return. Return in the sense, go back to their home country. This puts the deportation rate at roughly 28-29%. Nearly 3 out of 4 irregular migrants ordered to leave remain in the EU, often in legal limbo. If border nations cannot manage arrivals, internal bottlenecks emerge. sites designed for short-term processing become overcrowded. For example, the island of Lampedusa in Italy and the Moria camp in Greece housed thousands in facilities built for hundreds. Every arrival has the right to file an asylum claim, and that's international law, but processing requires background checks, translation, legal representations, and interviews. The agency currently has around 1,300 people deployed in 12 member states. The agency will also progressively shift from preparing guidance material on the new rules to providing more active operational support on the ground with their implementation, the European Asylum Agency explained. When tens of thousands arrive at once, the system slows. Courts become overwhelmed and cases take years. Frontline towns divert emergency services, healthcare, and police resources to manage arrivals, stretching local capacity. Meanwhile, countries like Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Belgium face housing shortages and struggle to accommodate large numbers of asylum seekers. Education, healthcare, and welfare systems are also under strain. To cope, the EU is overhauling its migration system. Under the Dublin regulation from 1990, the first country an asylum seeker enters is responsible for processing them. You enter Europe through Italy, Italy is the country that is responsible for you. Meaning that even if, like, let's say, so you have a migrant that arrives in Italy, it moves to France and puts there an asylum request, or is caught by the cops. What will happen is, under the Dublin rule, they will be told, well, actually, it's not France that is supposed to deal with you, it's Italy, because you entered the EU through Italy. So if you want to put an asylum request, you have to do it in Italy. And so your asylum request will be sent to Italy, and you will be yourself sent to Italy. That's the Dublin regulation, the Dublin rules. Country of entry in Europe is the one responsible to manage that person. This placed a disproportionate burden on Mediterranean states such as Italy, Spain, Greece, and Malta, because, of course, a good chunk of the migration routes go through these countries, and so they become the first country of entry. To reduce arrivals, the EU paid billions to Turkey in 2016 to curb crossings into Greece. So in 2015-2016, we had the migration crisis after the war in Syria. And we had over 1 million people arriving in Europe, mostly, or to a large extent, through Greece and Turkey. And so, to kind of tackle the issue, the EU basically wrote a check to Turkey, paying billions to them to tell them, okay, you stop them from trying to cross to Greece, and in exchange, we give you money, which was efficient in reducing the amount of people crossing from Turkey. But on the other end, what happened is that it gave leverage to Turkey. Whenever Turkey was unhappy with the EU, somehow you had a surge in the amount of people crossing the Mediterranean to come in the EU through Turkey, until the EU or the member state concerned was sorting out his issue with Turkey or paying additional money. Same thing with Morocco. Basically, all the countries that have like a bottleneck on the migration route to Europe use that to their advantage against Europe. Crossing fell sharply, but the policy left Europe vulnerable to pressure from external governments. The failure of these measures prompted Brussels to develop a new mechanism in 2024. So you see... Oh, wait. Yeah, okay, it's the amount of returns per country. up, you see the ones that sends the most back is Germany, and Germany being one of the primary target for migrants for many different reasons, either because they have links with the country, because it's the richest country, etc., etc. Country use migrants as bargaining chips. Oh yeah, of course, of course. Then you have France. Who is there? Sweden also, and then Cyprus. What about Italy? Surprising at Italy, there must be like a question of how they calculate the thing, because like you see Germany, like they declare, okay, they send X thousand to people, including X to non-EU country. Why the difference? Is the Dublin regulation. If a migrant is caught in Germany, but they realize that they actually entered through Greece or Italy, well then Germany say, okay, you're not my problem, I send you back to Greece or Italy, because they are the ones responsible. So that's why you have a difference between the total returns and those who are returned to non-EU countries, because like the difference are about 7,000. Those are sent to Italy, to Greece, to Spain, etc., etc., where they first entered the EU. But it's interesting to see like the frontline country having, like you take Italy, barely have any number of returns, and that number that makes sense that the number is exactly the same as the return to non-EU country. But it's very low. Question being, the fact that to a certain extent, the country of entries are only transit country. People enter the EU through Italy, but they don't want to stay in Italy. They want to go to Germany, they want to go to the UK, they want to go elsewhere. So Italy is just a pit stop, and so they don't either put an asylum request there, or they're being left alone. One of the criticisms, for instance, when the tension between the frontline countries and the others, France, Germany, and the others, is they accuse that, for instance, France will tell to Italy, you know that you're only a transit country, so that migrants do not want to stay in your country, so you just let them. Meaning they enter into Italy, you look the other way, and you let them go to France, to Croatia, to the other countries. That way, they're not your problem anymore. Despite the fact that you are the one supposed to deal with it, because they entered through Italy, and so you should be taking care of them. So that's also, you have internal tensions within the EU between the frontline countries and those that are called like secondary immigration countries, meaning the countries where they go after entering the EU. Alright, let's continue. So the Asylum and Migration Pact is a new unified system that streamlines migration management by setting stricter rules on asylum, border management, and integration. The 9 regulations that are directly applicable in national law represent an important step forward in regulatory convergence, meaning that national procedure will gradually align, and in time, so too should asylum outcomes, the European Asylum Agency told Euronews. The new screening regulations introduces mandatory pre-entry identity, security and health check at external borders within 7 days, or within 3 days if the migrant is already inside the EU. So you catch a migrant, it has to go through screening, so you basically do a check on who he is, where he comes from, and his health, to basically collect data. Member states must respect fundamental rights during the screening procedure and ensure independent monitoring systems. Reforms to the Eurodac fingerprint database will facilitate screening by enabling new personal data collection, whether facial images, identity, or travel documents, and issuing security warning to spot individuals linked to terrorism. Fast-track streamlined asylum rules help national governments manage international protection consistently. For example, the Reception Condition Directive and the Qualification Regulation set minimal EU-wide standards for reception and assistance, ensuring migrants have the same chance of protection across the Union. While individuals now have access to free legal counseling, the pact imposes stricter rules on abusive applications and on migrants who move away from the initial country of arrival. So, if a migrant is not playing the game fairly, rules are going to be stricter on them. When the new screening mechanism identifies persons in a vulnerable situation, such as victims of torture, rape, or other serious form of psychological, physical, sexual violence, or gender-based violence, member states should not apply the accelerated examination or asylum border procedure if these applicants' needs cannot be adequately catered for, the European Agency for Asylum said. So let's see, what is this map? Third country nationals were found to be illegally present in the EU, okay. And number of apprehension per 1,000 people. Okay, so France, not friends. 2.31 apprehension per 1,000 of people, and the maximum Slovenia. To be fair, the population is far lower in Slovenia. Almost 22 apprehension, or in 2025, rather like 13.41 apprehension per 1,000 inhabitants. And you see like Italy, 1.85, Greece is 7.41, Cyprus 9. Where's Malta? Oh, Malta, small dot. Come on. Je l'avais. Ah! Fuck it, I'm zooming. And Malta, 3.16 per inhabitant. Spain, 1.2. Okay, 0.7. Hungary, 371. Sure. I'm just checking like the main countries of entry. 16,044. Okay. Alright. The pact focuses on preventing illegal migration at the point of departure through international partnerships with third country of origin or transit. This includes strengthening border management capacities in partner countries, including cooperation with Frontex, collaborating to strengthen national migration policies and anti-smuggling efforts, and addressing the root causes of irregular migration through development aid. So you make deals with countries where the migrants come from or the migrants come through to basically stop them before they reach the EU. Individuals who do not require protection must now leave the EU and may face detention for up to 24 months if they do not cooperate or pose security risk during the return process. Rejected asylum seekers can also be transferred to return hubs in third country considered safe, so that's the return regulation. So the EU agency explained that while the new union-wide list of safe countries of origin identifies third countries that generally do not generate protection needs, exceptions can be made for specific parts of a country's territory or specific profiles, meaning that those applicants' protection needs would be assessed in the more classical asylum procedure and for which a decision needs to be made within 6 months. The pact shifts Europe's strict first entry system, so the Dublin regulation, to a mandatory solidarity mechanism with the Asylum and Migration Management Regulation. The Dublin regulation led to imbalances in migration management, with Italy, Greece, Malta, and Spain bearing the greatest responsibility as main entry points. In 2015, the EU's emergency relocation program moved 34,000 people from Italy and Greece to other European countries. Member states offered voluntary relocation assistance to Italy and Malta in 2018 and to Greece in 2020. In June 2022, 16 member states signed the voluntary solidarity mechanism. This new mechanism is a permanent system for redistributing reception and protection responsibilities. You have 20 migrants, you relocate them with among the 16 countries that signed it. It clarifies which national government examines asylum applications and ensures access to free legal counseling and family reunification. The principle is that no member state should manage large numbers of irregular migrants alone. National governments must contribute to a solidarity pool through relocations, financial contributions, or measures such as capacity building. Member states can choose the type of assistance they want to receive, but the Commission decides who can benefit from it based on the level of migratory pressure. Migrants will still apply for protection in the first member state they enter and remain there until responsibility is assigned. This continues to place a burden of processing daily arrivals on 1,000 European countries. The agency explained that its new monitoring system aims to identify and prevent potential shortcomings and to ensure that any issues don't cascade or have a knock-on effect on the wider common European asylum system. To prepare for the June 2026 deadline, EU countries had to rewrite national laws to align local police, courts, and immigration offices with the new EU rules. Frontline countries began hiring border guards and data entry clerks, while northern countries restructured asylum housing funding. To prevent chaos, the European Commission launched a common implementation plan that breaks the pact into practical tasks for national governments, like setting up specialized training for border officials and upgrading systems to coordinate with the EU database. Despite planning, many countries lack space to safely house people during border checks. You need to put the people somewhere. The pact requires strict screenings at the external border. Frontline states struggle to build specialized border centers fast enough. Another issue is that the system relies on speed, but there is a shortage of qualified asylum judges, translators, and fingerprinting technicians. If some countries are fully ready, but others only half ready, the entire system faces risks. People smugglers can target states that haven't set up their borders properly. People may bypass the screening and head towards Northern Europe, which will remain under pressure. Likewise, if ready countries feel disproportionately burdened, they could close their own borders, undermining the Schengen area. On the 8th of May, the European Commission released a report assessing countries' preparedness. It said that while political willingness is high, practical execution is lagging. So they will not be ready on Friday. It noted that deploying new IT systems for migrant tracking and building border detention facilities are severely behind schedule in several key states: Germany, Italy, Greece, Spain, and Cyprus. So what is this one? Refused entry of third country national into the EU on ground. Okay, so why do you refuse someone to enter the EU? So an alert. Okay, you are the latest is what's the unit? Is it in percentage? Let's see. There must be percentage. Yeah. So an alert is like if someone is a security threat, for instance, or they are tagged as someone under asylum procedure, or not supposed to be there, blah blah blah. so 13%. They have fake documents, 1%. No valid documents, 8.7%. Public threats, 3.7%. Yeah, also that's, if I recall correctly. So if you are a migrant, or any non-European, actually, it's not just a migrant, any non-European, and that you are in the Schengen area, you can go to a different country. You can leave the country. But you have a limit. You cannot stay more than 3 months in a row within 6 months. Basically to avoid the person moving out definitely or for a very long period in another member state. And so this is for people who already exceeded the amount they were allowed to stay outside their country of arrival. And that's a good chunk, 17%. Okay, the justification. Okay, false visa, okay. I mean, there's a bit of an overlap. Oh, travel document, okay, no, that's different. Okay, interesting. And that was the end of the article. Any questions on that before we move on to, again, a completely different topic? To talk about petitions. Nope. Well, if we have a collective nope, then we are noping out of this article. Up. At the beginning of a headache. Terrible. The streamer is suffering. Alright, so let's talk petitions and direct democracy. So you may have heard over the years of a small tool called the European Citizen Initiative. You may have heard of, for instance, the Stop Killing Video Game. You may have heard of the initiative to put an end to the the association agreement with Israel. You may have heard about the initiative to ban conversion therapy, that sort of thing. Those are European Citizen Initiative, basically European petitions. So 1 million citizens signing a petition to put something on the agenda and that then the Commission and the Parliament must assess. Doesn't mean that they have to do it in the sense of doing what the petition asks, but they have to assess the thing. If I recall correctly, it's been introduced when the ACI, ACI is the anti-coercion, ECI, sorry. 20, I don't remember if it's Lisbon or 2012. Yeah, let's see. Brain is bugging out badly like right now, like it's terrible. European Citizen. Maybe the introduction of the article says it. 2012, okay, so I'm not crazy. It was 2012. All right. So did the EU's direct democracy tool promise change, and does it work? Campaigners, it says it gives citizens access to Brussels, but not leverage over it. Direct democracy is not just for Switzerland. The EU has its own version, the European Citizens Initiative, or ECI. It gives people a way into Brussels without needing a lobby badge, a permanent representation, or a high tolerance for institutional coffee. When it was launched in 2012, the promise sounded almost radical by EU standards. Gather 1 million valid signatures from at least 7 EU countries on an issue within EU powers, and the European Commission must listen and formally respond. So again, it's not a decision making process, it's an agenda setting process. You force something on the agenda, you don't force a decision. It was the first and still only transnational tool of direct democracy. But 131 registered initiatives later, and with just 13 replies, campaigners are disappointed. Some are outright skeptical. Some have discovered that public pressure in Brussels is not enough to succeed. The organizers of an initiative calling for an EU-wide ban on LGBTQ+ conversion therapy learned this the hard way. The campaign, led by ACT, targeted practices that seek to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. It had the kind of democratic and political backing that should, in theory, have made it hard to ignore. It gathered 1.2 million signatures, it won the support from the European Parliament across the board, and it sat comfortably within the EU's wider equality agenda. So on paper, it was ticking all the boxes. Everyone thought that the ban was going to happen, said Matteo Guargillo, ACT president. But the Commission stopped short of proposing legislation, likely due to a lack of unanimity among EU countries. Because when it comes to this sort of topic, again, the principle is you gather 1 million people from 7 countries. You need to you have a threshold. You can't have like 900,000 people in one country and then 6 other countries have 10,000 or 15,000 people. You need to have you have a ratio per population that needs to be respected. That's why you have like 131 that tried, but only 13 that actually, or about 10%, that actually got a reply from the Commission. Because it's just not just 1 million, it's 1 million spread evenly across 7 at least member states. And even when you do that, the only thing that you get is that the Commission is obliged to assess it. That's 7 countries. That's 7 countries. So the Commission is obliged to assess it. But they can say no. Or they can do something different. Because they have to assess whether it's proportional, whether it fits into the EU competences, and the political viability. And typically there, for this specific initiative on the conversion therapy, you had broad political support at Commission Parliament level, but the problem is that if you want to do a law like that on this topic, it's not the normal procedure. It's a unanimity procedure. And on this, the Commission likely saw, okay, there's no way we're going to get unanimity in the Council for a ban on conversion therapy. So it's just a law that's going to be in internal limbo, stuck in Council for 10, 15, 20 years or plus, or more. So they decide, no, we're not going to do the law, because, I mean, they don't justify it like that, but politically, that was a dead end, because the procedure for this particular law was unanimity. So instead, it committed to issuing non-binding recommendations to member states within a year and to encouraging national actions to extend the legal ban across the EU, a spokesperson said. Basically, they say, okay, we are encouraging member states to do stuff, but that's up to them. So it doesn't change much to the current situation. The Commission's reply, the Commission's reply is disappointing, Gargillo said, especially because the issue did not appear to be widely at odds with the EU executive position. Again, the problem is not the Commission position, the problem is member states. We have now to live with the idea that we fought so much, but we were blocked by a treaty, he told the reactive. Yeah, I mean, again, the treaty are setting the rules on how laws are adopted. Huh? It's not a petition that is going to supersede the treaties. And for good reason, I would say, huh? Because if you were to say that any petition reaching 1 million signature automatically gets the law, that's going to be rock and roll. Huh? As a reminder, one of the first European citizen initiative that managed to get the 1 million signature was a petition that was backed by all the anti-abortion association in Europe. In this case, they wanted to ban research on stem cells. Yeah, it was stem cells. And using arguments, pro-life arguments, and stuff like that. So, careful what you wish for, let's say. And the treaties are there for a reason. They serve also as a safeguard potentially for things that you would not like otherwise. And again, a petition, I mean, cannot supersede what is the equivalent of the European Constitution. That's pretty obvious. That sentence could almost be engraved above the entrance to the Berlaymont. It captures the central contradiction of the ECI. The tool operates inside a legal order where every proposal must fit within a legal basis, every competence is contested, and every ambitious idea risks being sent back to national capital with a polite note attached. I mean, every proposal must fit in a legal basis. Yes, that's called the rule of law. Again, that's not exactly crazy to expect that, a proposal must work within the what is legally possible. And there the problem, I mean, the issue with the ECI is that too often it is pitched as something it is not. Again, like I said, the ECI is an agenda setting thing. You put a topic on the table. You say, okay, this topic is very important for us. Deal with it. Look at it. Problem is that it is presented by activists when they are collecting signature, they're hyping the issue, saying, yeah, if you sign, guarantee the results. Results guarantee, we're gonna have the law. So the act that backed this thing on banning conversion therapy say, yeah, if you sign, guaranteed, we will get the ban. Alors, to be fair, as the article says earlier, the proposal they made was within the competence of the EU. It had the signature. It had the political backing from the institution. But it's a unanimity procedure, and member states are not necessarily in favor of that. And the Commission didn't see politically the need to open a front with the member states, pretty much just for the sake of it. The problem is that it creates frustration because people are expecting that, oh, if I sign, it's mandatory. Except that it's not. It's not how it works for legitimate reasons as well. Okay, so however, we should never forget that in the EU, we are talking about an institution that does not have full sovereignty. The first thing the Commission looks for when it makes a proposal is the legal basis, said Eric Longo, a professor of constitutional law at the University of Florence, who has long researched ECIs. I mean, yes and no. I agree to a sense that, yeah, the EU only has limited competence. But it's not exclusive to the EU, en fait. I would say. The same constraints exist at national level. You can't do a petition that would go against the constitution of a country. You can't do a petition on a competence that was transferred at EU level. So you still have the problem of the legal basis, even if it is particularly complicated at EU level, because it's true, it's not something with full sovereignty. It's not exclusive to the EU. It exists also at national level. You can't make something that is anti-constitutional through a petition. People should focus on petition at the national level. I mean, it's kind of a problem of the chicken and the egg. If you can, like, on the ban on conversion therapies, a good chunk of the people who signed the petition are from countries where conversion therapies are already banned. So at national level, you don't need to do much because, well, either the law is already done or they already represent politically sufficiently high thing that, the national government will move. So you're going at EU level to kind of force the issue on those that are not there yet. The problem is that, if it's, in this case, if it's something that relies on unanimity, that is stuck. So it's a chicken and the egg situation. And in this case, like they want to use the EU as leverage to force member states to move, because ACT would tell you, yes, I know that it was a policy that relied on unanimity, but the fact that the Commission would propose a law on this would send a political signal that would force the country that do not currently have the ban on conversion therapies to go on this issue. So they say, yeah, it would have created the political pressure that could have led potentially to a EU ban on conversion therapies. But again, that means that the Commission would be pissing off some member states. Is that something that the Commission wants to do because it is the member state on other things? Is it something that is even potentially politically workable? Like, is it politically possible, let's say, for, I don't know, countries like Poland or Hungary to support, or Bulgaria to support such bans? Even politically, for the national government, that's not necessarily viable. So again, it's chicken and the egg, and the political pressure that you create by doing even something that is doomed in advance versus the political cost of doing it. Sure, Commission can do something that it knows will not pass to put pressure on some countries. It's gonna piss off these countries that the EU will need on other files. So, political calculus, what is your priority? Okay. And when that legal basis is unclear, the Commission gets cautious. It fears that by proposing something in line with an ECI, the member states will immediately raise an objection on legal basis grounds, it told the directive. Yeah, that's also true, particularly at EU level. Since the Commission, the EU only has borrowed competencies, member states are very keen to jump on anything that's even remotely looks like the Commission going beyond those borrowed competencies. And sometimes just out of principle, they will challenge something just for the sake of it. To not create a precedent where the Commission can do something even if it was not super clear that they had the competence. That European scare is not in doubt. But between a public demand and an EU law sits the Commission, European Parliament and Council, representing national governments that jealously guard their sovereignty, three institutions that can take years to agree on something they all describe as urgent. It's a classic, so what is it? Okay, because I have black, okay. Ah, shit. Okay, I need to up over. Okay, so we have the main topics of the ECI. Most are on environment, consumer and health, justice, fundamental rights, okay. And the list, fisheries, security, migration and asylum. Yeah. Well, typically like, okay. Doing an ECI, for instance, on culture or education is going to be extremely difficult. Unless, I mean, it depends what you're asking, but if you're asking for a law, it's going to be very difficult because those two are areas where the EU has extremely limited competence. Very, very limited. So the Commission will look at this and say, yeah, but I can't actually. The treaties don't allow me to do laws on this. Like, yeah, sure. On consumer law, on environmental law, I have pretty wide, or even on trade, I have pretty wide competencies, so I can do quite a lot of things. On education, on culture, it's mostly national, it's a national competence, and I can't do shit about that. So again, the Commission can only act within the mandate that member states have given it. Indeed, the other problem with ECI is politics. MEPs in Parliament's major political groups are not exactly throwing their weight behind campaigns, even when the issue should naturally belong to one of them. Longo argues that the ECI could really have taken off if, at some point, it had become a tool supported above all by European political parties, because they can turn signature into pressure. But where are they, he asked. I mean, to be fair, so in the Parliament, you have one committee that is focused specifically on petitions, that is the Committee on Petitions. That's probably one of the least powerful committee of the Parliament. Like, that's where you go if you want to do nothing. Or be below the radar or whatever. When I was in the Parliament, if you had offered me to work in Peti, so the committee on petition, I would have said no. I say, yeah, no, I'll work anywhere but Peti. Because, like, the only thing that you do in this committee is that you have people, you do hearings of people who do petition. That's pretty much all that you do. And nobody gives a shit about that. There's no power behind this, there's no... You can't do anything about it. Like, okay, you can do a report on a petition, say the petition is nice. That's it. Oh, that's partly linked. So nobody gives a shit about Peti, and therefore nobody gives a shit about ECIs unless it's an ECI that politically is very useful for you for your political strategy. But one of the reasons maybe why nobody gives a shit in the Parliament about the ECIs is because the Parliament does not have the right of initiative. The Parliament cannot propose laws. Only the Commission can propose a law. Which is one of the main differences between the European Parliament and classic national parliaments. An MEP cannot make a law. And so that means that even if you have an ECI that you very much support, you can't say, okay, I'm taking that on board and I'm making my law, I'm making a law proposal even if the commission doesn't want to do it. You can't do it. So apart from saying, yeah, we're with you, thanks for coming, that's... who cares? And often, like in many cases, like the topics of the petition are completely disconnected from the political stakes, the political debates that are occurring in the European Parliament. Like, it's not something that is related to something where the political groups are actually fighting each other over. It's fairly rare. And so there's even less appeal to say, okay, I'm going to take that and turn it into an actual political fight, because there's no stake. Where was I? Yeah. If there is one lesson from previous initiatives, is that politics matters. A lot. The very first successful ECI, Right to Water, demanded that water remain a public service and a public good. It was launched in 2012 by the European Public Service Union and collected almost 2 million signatures. There was, call it, a moral obligation on the Commission to make something of this, Jan Willem Goudrian, the Union's General Secretary, told Euractiv. Had the Commission brushed off the first initiatives, he said, that would have been a huge disappointment for everybody and for the whole instrument of democratic participation. And it did get results. Water services were excluded from the concession directive, changes followed to the drinking water directive. The initiative also generated research and political pressure that showed the tool could have an effect. But part of its success is that the conditions around the campaign were unusually favorable. Across Europe, local and national campaigns were already pushing back against the privatization of water. The ECI simply helped connect those fights. So you already need to have a pre-existing political stake at national level, and the ECI is just kind of unifying it and turning it into a European fight that you can say, oh yeah, that's something that actually my voters care for, and so I will act upon it. Or my voters in the kind of MEPs or member states have political pressure to act on it. All that political momentum is much harder to repeat. Asked whether the tool still works as a route to influence EU policy, Goudrian said, "If you ask me, I am doubtful." Yeah, I mean, basically you need to have an alignment of the stars. Is it even the title of the thing? Yeah, you need to have an alignment of the stars for an ECI to work. Like, you need to have your petition to come out to be on a topic that happens to be trending, to finish at a moment where, at the right moment for political pressure to be able to be turned into a political initiative, and to have momentum. Otherwise, you're just like an isolated thing, completely disconnected from the political mood, and therefore there's no incentive to do anything about what you're asking. Part of the problem, he argued, is that many countries already have lighter petition tools with less bureaucracy. The EU version, by contrast, asks citizens to identify themselves in a way that can make a signature more like applying for a mortgage. To be honest, I've never looked at the... Let's check. European Citizen Initiative signature verification. Let's see. So you need to provide full name, address, date of birth, and nationality. Well, I don't exactly... I would not exactly call that like a impossible to information to provide easily. Oh, wait. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it doesn't seem like something that is so complicated. I don't think it's crazy to ask for the name and identification details to sign a petition that could end up becoming a law. We are a bunch of engineers. We don't have vast resources for lobbying or other kind of campaigning, said David Biasco from StarPass, a new initiative currently collecting signatures. I mean, he's vastly overestimating the amount of resources that most lobbies have. And I mean, that's kind of the paradox. Like, you're making a petition, so you need to collect signatures. By definition, if you want to do a successful petition, well, yeah, that implies to be able to do some kind of campaigning. Like, yeah, if you want this to succeed, yeah, that's kind of a logical step that, yeah, you should be able to mobilize some resources to campaign. Like, again, not something that is scandalous as a requirement, let's say. Yeah, it's complicated, but yeah, you want to make a new rule. It's not like collecting stamps. I don't know why I'm saying collecting stamps, but it's not like making a petition to do something in your village. Obviously, you have a different scale. Gargilo from Axory also said, "We are an association of students who fought for what they believed in. We are not institutionalized." Yes, but that's not an issue. Large organizations tend to have networks, comm teams, and the stamina to follow a file long after the signature counter stops, while grassroots groups must decode the EU machinery and run a continent-wide campaign on volunteers, hope, and badly timed social media posts. Longo also said the burden is real but defended the need for limits, including the 1-year deadline to gather signature. Otherwise, the instrument will lose momentum. Okay. Yeah, otherwise it's just something that is there eternally, and that's a bit pointless. So what is the ECI still good for? For Gudrian, its main value is as a good agenda setting tool, which is what it was designed for. Again, people sell the ECI as something that is a decision-making or decision-imposing tool. It never was this. It was always an agenda-setting tool that could potentially lead to political decision. But it was never a guaranteed, yeah, you're gonna get a decision. So it's a good agenda-setting tool, which is not a small thing in Brussels, where getting an issue noticed can take years, require several acronyms, and at least one stakeholder consultation. Which is true. In 1 year, it is not something that is meaningless, but in 1 year you can force the Commission to take a position on something. Normally, if you do normal lobbying, etc., it takes years and years to get the Commission to embrace a topic. So it's a speed. You could, if you have 1 million people, you speed run an entire process of putting something on the table. Longo sees values in the public debate that ECI creates. It is a thermometer of what is happening at the European level, including in terms of agenda setting, mobilization, and real politics. Bon, I'm not certain about that, because if you do something that is completely disconnected, you're not going to create that much of a public debate, but that's it. For the Commission, there are also positive spillover effects of ECIs reaching their required threshold. It allows citizens to bring important topics to the fore of the EU agenda. As such, they can drive discussions and influence the direction of policies. I agree, that can be something that is useful for the Commission, because it can break, like, let's say, resistance from member states to talk about a topic. Like, member states will say, no, we don't want to talk about the topic. And then the commission will say, oh, well, I have 1 million people who say it's a topic, I'm obliged to. But again, it depends on the political willingness of the commission to use an ECI as leverage to do an initiative. The ECI is only ever a tool more than an obligation for the commission. Either the ECI fits something that the commission would be ready to do, but needed like the political, let's say, excuse to do so, or it doesn't see it as politically worth the efforts, and then it ends up becoming like a footnote. Or just something like to... I mean, sometimes like ECI can be the start of something. The sense, yeah, okay, let's take again the conversion therapy. You don't have a law. But even if you don't have a law, the commission does say, we're going to make an official document about this, where we take position on this, saying, okay, we would like member states to do this. And then it creates a longer term leverage, in the sense that commission is basically asking, okay, member states, please do that, because we think it's a good thing to do. And then it becomes leverage, because you could then say to the commission or to member states, well, you know, we try to do this by relying on the good faith of member states. We gave them the opportunity to do that voluntarily. They did not do so, assuming they did not move. So that means that the commission is legitimate to act at European level, because, well, the ball doesn't get rolling at national level. And so then the commission could use the existence of the ECI and the non-legislative tool it did before as a justification to say, well, I am forced to do a law on this because by yourself you're not doing it, despite me pushing you to do so. So in the longer run, having an ECI can be useful for the commission. But again, there you fall into the classic lobbying where it takes years and years and years to get something done. Okay. That helps explain why new campaigns still use it. StarPass, launched on the 9th of May, Europe Day, wants EU countries to offer citizens an alternative passport cover. Blue, European, and marked with a circle of stars. Bon. Then, we can argue that's something we really need. It's symbolic. I will give you that. EU citizenship exists in the treaties. The campaigner Saban Alexandriuk said, but has little visible expression in the passport. I mean, to be fair, there is already some harmonization of passports. All EU passports, except the Croatian one, have the same color. They're all red. You look at your passport, you will see, unless you're Croatian, it's all the same color. It was harmonized at EU level. De facto harmonized at EU level. So, in a way, you already have a color for European passports. And so you have a bit of unity. And you could argue, I'm going to be a place devil advocate, you can argue that this alternative passport that StarPass wants to launch, so it's alternative, it's voluntary. So it would be blue, European, marked with a circle of stars. Since it's voluntary, it would rely either on member states or on individual people to get it. Meaning that you're creating, since not everyone will do it, you're creating an image of disunity because suddenly you will have some member states or some Europeans that will have the blue passports and not the other. While for the time being, everyone, except the Croatian, have the red passport, that is the European passport. So in a way, it's a bit ironic because that initiative that wants to unify passports will create less unification than the current situation. Anyway, with the signature drive on the way, organizers hope the Commission will put the idea before national governments. And then, in a few years, we can see people with the blue passports going around, Alexandra Yuk added. Up. And then you have the status, so you see, out of all the ECI, so the 130 something, 76 failed to reach 1 million signature. 27 even stopped. They say, okay, fuck this, I'm out. 24 were refused, most likely because it is outside the scope of EU competence. In the sense, like, the Commission outright said, no, that I will not allow this petition because you're clearly outside EU rules, so it's pointless. And only 13 ticked all the boxes, meaning within EU competencies and 1 million signature across seven member states. So we have a 10% success rate, more or less, as far as ECI are concerned. The data on ECI represents a good result for an instrument created with the aim of making the EU more rights-based and more democratic, Longo said. Debatable. I mean, again, ECI is just a tool. You can have people who gather 1 million signatures for purposes that are definitely not democratic or rights-based. People should not idealize what the ECI is. The ECI is a tool. It can cut both ways. Hence why having safeguards is pretty useful as well. And in the end, ECI has become a lobbying tool like a different kind of lobbying tool, but a lobbying tool nonetheless. All in all, 2 lessons emerge from those who have tried. The first is that you need the right issue, not just one that is worthy, but one that is emotional enough to travel, and the second is that an ECI is one moment in a longer campaign, Gurian said. It is as much about trying to get the issue on the agenda as following up afterwards, keeping the campaign going. aka lobbying. That is both the strength and the weakness of the instrument. The ECI can open a door, it cannot make the EU walk through it. Any questions about that? Before we move on to the final topic, where we're going to talk about far rights and cordon sanitaire. Up. No questions. Then moving on. Alright, final article. So, you may be aware that there is a little something called the cordon sanitaire, which is or was, depending on how you interpret the current situation, the political practice of artificially isolating the far right to prevent it from having influence in politics, whether at national or European level. European level in this case. It's not a law, it's a sort of gentleman agreement between the parties that are not far right, but that commonly agree that the far right, it's kind of cringe, it's kind of dangerous, and so we must prevent them from having influence, and so we don't play with them. That's why, for the longest time, the far right was very isolated because nobody wanted to play with it. But with the rise of populism and the far right, and also the evolution of the far right itself, the cordon sanitaire is cracking, if not falling, in Brussels and beyond. And the European far right is actively trying to... the European cordon sanitaire arguably still exists to an extent, but is already very weakened. Because the far right has increased significantly its rank, and now it's, depending on how you count it, up to 25% of the parliament, or between 20 and 25% of the European Parliament. So they are hard to ignore anymore. And also, we have politically the EPP that is using more and more the far right as a tool to force through its policies against the liberals, the socialists, the Greens, and the traditional allies. And so they are using the far right to get what they want through. So in this on some policies, not a majority of policies, but very visible, politically visible policies, migration, environment, that sort of thing. So in that sense, the cordon sanitaire kind of weakened, even if the EPP will still tell you, no, we don't cooperate with the far right. Back when I was an assistant in the EPP, so that's 10 years ago, there was no way in hell you were doing anything with the far right. Any amendment coming from the far right was shot on sight. The amendment could be the most common sense thing of the universe, saying the sky is blue. You voted against because it came from the far right. You did not play with these people, you did not vote with them. Anything coming from them was straight out shot down. That was before. They drifted over the years. Well, it's a drift and a political strategy. Globally, the EU has drifted politically on the right. That's a reality. Rise of the populism, etc., etc. It's also a political strategy, in the sense that the EPP is now at the height of its power. It has never been that influential. It is the biggest political group in the European Parliament. It has the largest number of governments in the EU, and increasingly, it is willing to play hard with the socialists, notably, and the liberals, to get what it wants. In the Parliament, for the first time this mandate, the EPP has the choice of its majority. Like, before this mandate, the EPP always had to make a deal with the socialists, with the liberals, etc., to have a majority. There was no majority apart from that. This mandate is different because for the first time the EPP can make the traditional pro-European majority, so with the socialists, with the liberals, and to an extent the Greens, and that's still the majority case, like most texts in the parliament are adopted with this majority. But the EPP now has the possibility to make a majority with the far right, which is now using to put pressure on the socialists and the liberals on the topics they consider as key. I get why they did it, but I don't really like the principle of not voting for something even if it could be good just because it came from a bad party. Well, the idea there is to say these people are politically unacceptable and you do not want to normalize them and legitimize them because they are not a player like the other. Yes, sometimes they could say things we agree with, but because of the overall political ideology that they represent, we consider them outside of the scope of the acceptable game. So it's a principle kind of thing. You say you don't legitimize because otherwise, if you vote for things, even if things that you agree with, they're gonna say, oh, but you see, they agree with me, so I'm a normal party, which is not traditionally the case for the far right. But there was also a change in the culture of the far right. It was much easier to do that in the past than it is now, because back when I was an assistant, far right was not working. They were not doing anything, or they were doing batshit insane things. So it was very easy 99% of the time to exclude them because either they were not there, they were putting out batshit insane things, and they didn't matter. So it was very easy. Now, again, 25% of the parliament, they have professionalized a lot their practices, and so it becomes much more, politically the EU has moved right, etc. So there is an addition of things that makes it much more difficult to ignore them. Then ultimately, there's still the political choice, in this case of the EPP, of using the far right as leverage to bully the socialists, which is a political decision. Sure, but by making them a pariah, it played in their favor when people started to destroy the institution. Yeah, I mean, it plays into the victimization, of course. Of course. But that's, I mean, again, it's the balancing act. It's easy to do when they represent 5 to 10%. When they start representing 20% or plus, that becomes tricky. When they professionalize, when they soften the tone of everything, etc., does the old strategy still work? That's an open debate. I mean, it's like everyone is still looking for the recipe to beat the far right. But like, for instance, you had people. Yeah, like you have the debates. Should you engage, for instance, should we have a debate on the demographic policy, natality, this sort of thing? You will have a whole lot of people will tell you, no, we don't talk about these topics because they have been instrumentalized by the far right. The far right has taken control of these topics. And so we don't talk about them because otherwise we're just going to legitimize the narrative of the far right, etc., etc. Based in racism, xenophobia, machin, grand remplacement, and all that. On the other end, pretending that a topic doesn't exist and failing to provide an acceptable approach to what could be considered by some a legitimate topic, that doesn't solve the situation. On the contrary, I mean, the public opinion will see, will identify that as a potential issue and see that the only one putting a solution on the table, or solutions on the table, are the far right, and say, oh, they are the offer on the table. So you have 10 different debates on how to deal with them. Do you isolate them? Do you not isolate them? Do you talk about their topics? Do you not talk about their topics? Do you try to soften them or not? Because there's also the strategy of the EPP is also to say towards part of the far right, like towards the ECR, to say, okay, if you respect a number of red lines, like you respect the rule of law, you are pro-European, you are pro-Ukraine, this sort of thing, well, okay, we will accept to talk with you and we will include you a bit more in the mainstream. And so you will get benefit because you will become more legitimate because you abandon the most problematic part of your position. So that's also an argument that the EPP is making, say, yeah, by engaging with part of them, we drag them towards the center, we push them to abandon the batshit insane thing that they were doing in the past. On the other end, the counter-argument is, of that is, well, no, actually it's the other way around, is that if you engage with the far right will pull you towards the far right. And so you, EPP, you will start doing policies that were until now the trademark of the far right. Again, interpretation, who is pulling who the most. And that's the core of the fight. And the influence fight between the EPP and the far right is who is influencing who the most. And the strategy of the EPP, led by Manfred Weber, if we are purely looking at the results, so far, it's a successful strategy for the EPP. By increasingly going on the turf of the far right and even now politically cooperating with them on some issues, DPP has gained in seats, in power and everything. So in the short term, it has been absolutely a net benefit for DPP. Undeniable. Problem is DPP selling its souls to the devil? And does DPP risk burning the bridges with its traditional allies? So the socialists, the liberals, with whom it has the most in common and with whom 75% of the 80% of the normal business in the parliament is being carried out. So in the long term, you could argue, yeah, the DPP is going to shoot itself in the foot. Because at some point, SND liberals will say, oh, screw you, we're not working with you anymore. So yeah. Okay, let's go into the article, which is based on an interview with one of the lead MEP of the Patriots, so the far right. So the woman helping Europe far right crack Brussels. Marieke Ellers has been at the forefront of the Patriots for Europe to move closer to the mainstream. Marieke Ellers has one of the most important jobs in Europe's far right, turning a movement built on opposing Brussels into one capable of shaping its laws. She is the chief whip of the Patriots for Europe, the third largest group in the European Parliament, at a time when the far right is playing a much larger and much more influential role both in Brussels and across the continent. Now, the Patriots is where you find Rassemblement National, Fidesz. Who else is in the in Patriots? Lega in Italy. You have Geert Wilders. Where else do we have in the Patriots, like from memory? AfD is in ESN. Vox. I have a doubt now. Is Vox is still ECR or if they went to Patriots? I don't remember. Chega, oh yeah, Chega is gonna be Patriots, yeah. It seems the political parties, particularly in democratic countries, only think in short-term benefits. Well, you think about the next election. Alright, so that's Patriots is one of the two far-right groups in the European Parliament, third biggest group, and Marieke Ellers is Dutch. So Ellers takes on a new role as the so-called cordon sanitaire, in which centrist forces agreed to keep the far-right away from decision-making, has been dismantled. We are the main opposition in this house, Ellers, a Dutch lawmaker from Geert Wilders' Party of Freedom, the PVV, told Politico in an interview in her office in Brussels in June, the months after she was elected chief whip. The far-right strategy changed after the 2024 EU election. And that's also a key point. The far-right changed its strategy. The growth of the Patriots in the election meant the centre-right EPP, so the largest political family in the parliament, could count on parties to its right to pass legislation, snubbing its traditional centre-left and liberal allies. So that's let's say this part is more strategy of the EPP. But the big change that we see in the far right over the recent years is the professionalization. Like I said, it just started when I was an assistant, but before like 15 years ago, the far right groups, they were not big enough to have a political group, so that was even easier. But they were basically a bunch of nut jobs. They didn't give a shit. They were not working. They were just there to collect the checks and do communication stunts. They were not doing anything. They were never present in committees. They were not working. They weren't doing anything. Nobody gave a shit about them. So it was extra easy to ignore them. For the past 10 years, the far right, or at least part of the far right, has increasingly professionalized itself. In the sense that they say, okay, if we are reaching the point where we're getting more and more MEPs, we are getting closer to potentially getting power at national level. So we need to get professional. And so that means we need to send people who have maybe a bit less nut jobs to the parliament. We need to take assistance at work, and we need to start, working like normal MEPs. And that makes it much more difficult because then you have people that used to be nut jobs and that suddenly are acting increasingly, like normal MEPs. And then it becomes more complicated to justify that you don't talk to them, you don't engage with any of them. And it's a strategy like for instance, I happen to know the Secretary General of the Patriots. I know the guy who is the Secretary General of the Patriots. Why? Because the guy used to be a colleague of mine. He's French, and he used to be, when I was an assistant, he was also an assistant in the EPP. So he was a colleague of mine. That's how I know him, because we were working in the same delegation in the EPP. I had beers with the guy, we had dinners and everything, so I know the guy. But when, in 2019, there was a big push of the far right, notably in France, one of the things that the Rassemblement National did was to go hunting for people, because they had much more MEPs than they were expecting, not enough people competent to staff them, and so they just knocked on doors and say, hey, do you want to work for the far right? We'll pay you a shit ton of money, and you get it. And so in this case, as it happened, it was quite compatible with the position of the far right, so he accepted it. And he told me, like, I remember I had a discussion with him like a few years later. I met him in the parliament, so we were chatting about that. And he was telling me, but to give you the background, so he was an assistant in my delegation, and he was working at some point for the head of the delegation. So in each delegation, so the French MEPs from the EPP, so it was 20-something MEPs, you elect the head of delegation, the boss or the representative of your delegation within the EPP. And that guy was working at some point for the president of the delegation. And of course, he picked up skills by doing that. And so when he was hired by the far right, one of the key things the far right wanted was those skills. Because they suddenly became, they were much more numerous, they were able to create political groups, but they had no fucking idea of how to manage a group. What do you do when you're supposed to be a somewhat serious political group or coordinated delegations. They didn't know how to do that. And so they hired people from other political groups or militants that are activists, that are party members that are increasingly professional themselves to do that. And so the guy was telling me, yeah, the fact that I had this experience as assistant of the head of the delegation, for them it was like the Everest. Like they never had that kind of skill. I was things that were for me absolutely basic in terms of organization of a delegation. For them, it was like the discovery of I don't know what. They were discovering hot water. So that kind of skill set they had to acquire. And then also, they especially in the case of the French, they got large delegations of MEPs before they got large delegations of national MPs. And so they also turned the European Parliament into a training pool, in the sense that anyone... So they had 20-something MEPs. I'm talking French format. There are 20-something MEPs. So lots of people. And so for years, the Rassemblement National used that to train people for national level. Because they say, okay, for the next election, national election, we will aim to have a large number of MPs. And so we will need competent people to help our new MPs. And so they were sending to Brussels every single somewhat not brain dead party member that could find to train them in the European Parliament on how does the Parliament work, what does political work look like, so that they could learn at European level and then bring those competences back at national level, so that when the Rassemblement National would get national MPs, they would have competent people that they could staff them with. So it became like a training pool. And so that process of professionalization is also what changed the situation for the way people had to deal with the far right. And that extended, like I'm talking internally far right, but even beyond. Lobbyists, for years it was very easy. You don't talk to the far right. Now, for the past 2 mandates, you have a huge debate among lobbyists. Should you or should you not talk to the far right as a lobbyist? A lobby is transpartisan by definition. You're not affiliated to any party. You're there to convince people to vote one way or another. And when you have a far right that is increasingly behaving in a somewhat professional manner, even having MEPs becoming actual experts in some topics, you have now MEPs who are genuinely experts, who have genuine technical knowledge about topics, and they're not just brain-dead people. You have to acknowledge that. Do you talk or not to these people? Depends on the lobby, I guess. There's a bit of that, of course. You have some lobby, indeed. If you are an NGO that works on migrants' rights, it's not a big loss for you not to talk to the far right, because it's very unlikely that they would ever be on your side. But you're in industry. You're in a big economic sector. What do you do? That's an open debate. You could say, okay, they are 25%. They have been elected. They represent 25% of the parliament. If there is a vote that is going to be tricky, that's going to be like 10 votes for or against, yeah, maybe there's a justification in talking to the far right, or at least part of it. If they are behaving somewhat professionally, okay, you can share technical expertise. Or you could have just a principal position. No, we don't talk to the far right. And that's a debate that is occurring in the bubble for the past mandate, because it depends on what lobby you are, it depends on what is your nationality, it depends what are the red lines that you're placing, etc., etc. So the role of the far right is, even for the ecosystem, a big question. Even if, like, for instance, like, I think it's not exactly like a big stretch to say that a large majority of the lobbies in Brussels, or the people working for lobbies in Brussels, are definitely not aligned personally with the far right. They tend to be pro-European. So obviously, like, on a personal level, wide majority of lobbyists definitely not big fans of the far right. But then professionally, do you do it? Does it make sense or not? You can have an approach, business is business. You think lobby should be banned. Well, so for you, like, politicians should be deciding on their own without outside input, without NGOs, without companies, without anyone telling them anything. It's just they get in their office and say, well, today I feel like doing this. Because lobbying, that's what it is. Huh? Lobbying is giving information to politicians so that they decide based on technical and political analysis. Lobbying is inherently part of a healthy democracy. And that's not me saying it, that's Transparency International. As long as you don't have godlike people who have absolute knowledge over everything, you will need people to share their expertise and also legitimately say what they think. It's legitimate that someone who is going to be impacted by a law says, okay, this is what I think. You think it's giving too much influence to the rich. Also, again, lobbying is it's not just the companies, it's also NGOs. And then it's a politician's responsibility to decide whether or not who they trust or not. It's not a question of lobbying is just the rich. And again, like, doesn't mean that someone rich doesn't have legitimate points to make. It's more like influencing, not just giving information. Well, yes and no. Yes and no. You're right. At the core, it's also influence. You're right. But information is the core thing, I would say. Like, information comes before and then with influence. Because, like, okay, so I'm a lobbyist, you know that. I work for book sector. Most people don't know about the book sector. It's not, unless they're publishers themselves, they work in there, they don't know about the book sector. So one of the first thing I do when I interact with politicians, be it the commission, the MEPs or whatever, is to explain them. I give them a shot, okay, what is the book sector? Those are the statistics, what is that we do, what is the role of people doing this, etc. So first and foremost, I give information. This is what we are. And once people identify what we are. Okay, those are our positions, and we're trying to influence your position. And everybody knows, there's no surprises. When I'm sitting across someone from the commission or someone in the parliament, they know I'm a lobbyist, they know I'm also trying to influence them, but I give them information. Like, they will ask me question because they don't know. They say, okay, legally you tell me that this is the impact, can you explain why? Give me information explaining your position. So you have a lot of information that you give. From information and good quality information comes influence. The reasons you have influence is not just because it's not like an objective thing, influence. Influence is the consequence of something else. I will be able to influence a decision because the people in front of me trust the quality of what I say. They consider that I give quality information, that my analysis, technical and political analysis, is suitable, and so that gives me influence because it's a recognition of the quality. Then there's also, on the side of politician, political choices. That's why I always say that a decision from a decision maker is always the combination of a technical decision and a political decision. You act on facts, that's the technical part, and you act politically what interests or what balance do I want to defend? What political objective I want to defend? A political decision is the combination of those two things. And so as a lobbyist, you give the technical thing and you try, of course, to push a bit on the political side. Say, okay, my sector is doing this, is doing that. Politically, it's interesting because this, because that. But information is the core thing of lobbying. Like, influence is just a consequence of all this. And information goes both ways. It's not just me giving information, it's also me getting information. Because I'm outside the institution. I don't know what's going on necessarily inside the institution, so I'm meeting people to know what's going on. They will give me information. So information goes both ways in lobbying. And sometimes, like, you have... a lobby becomes the tool of a politician. In the sense that, let's say that you have a file. You have one MEP that is trying to do something, and another shadow is against him. Bon. For whatever reason. You will meet a lobby that is in favor of your position. You will tell the lobbyist, okay, I'm stuck with that shadow, with that other politician. He doesn't agree with me. I can't convince him. I need you to go see other people from other political groups to put that guy in a minority. Convince the other people. That way I can overcome that. And so the lobby, in a way, becomes a political tool. The interests are aligned between the lobby and the politician, but yeah, you're going to try to convince the other because you say, okay, this is the political pressure point that you need to press. I don't know. I think the majority of people view is like that. About what? Like, I mean, in general, the public opinion has a negative view of lobbying because they associate that to corruption, which it is not. But unfortunately, that's unfortunately the public view of what lobbying is. And I don't know. Why do they trust you when you have personal interest in the matter? But I mean, okay. Why will someone trust me when I give information? They know I'm defending an interest. There's no doubt about that. Like when I'm saying, again, I'm very clear on the fact, yes, I defend book publishers. I'm here to represent the interest of book publishers. So the interest is very clear identified. It's announced. They know who they are meeting. So it's very clear from the get-go, yes, we are an interested party. They trust us because A, they look at the information that we give, and the information that we give makes sense. Like if I give information about the book sector, yes, book publishers know what the book sector is. So objectively, you give quality information. Then I'm a jurist. I make like part of my job, and they will ask you, okay, I will share like my legal analysis of a law, and so that they will listen to my technical and legal analysis, and then they will say, okay, does that make sense what he says? I will back that with arguments, etc., etc., etc. They will trust because they say, okay, he has a technical analysis, sure, that is colored by the interest that he's defending, and that I announce. I say, yes, I said this because for us, this is the consequence on us. Does that analysis make sense? And does that analysis fit the political objective and the political interest of the MEP? Again, the influence is the correspondence between the political interest of a politician and the interest of one or more lobby that is there. And sometimes your role is to balance things out. And you can say, okay, I can do something for you there, but I have to do something else for someone else. So it's all about balance. And sometimes you will tell a lobbyist, or when I was an assistant, but now people will tell me, okay, I hear what you're saying, I understand, but I need to balance things. I cannot have a law that is just going your way. I need to have something that is giving each side a bit of something. So I will give you this, but I will not give you that because I think that it's not as justified, or the other are whatever reason. But it's the trust they give me is because I give quality information, quality analysis. I make sense, and then that's what creates trust. And of course, from the moment I've created this trust, but well, of course, sometimes they will ask me. Well, it happens that sometimes you will have an assistant that actively sends you his amendments, his or her amendment, say, okay, I have drafted this, or I will send that. What do you think? And so, again, you give your feedback, and they do whatever they want with it. Again, your interest is very clearly identified. You will argue around that interest, and then they see whether they are convinced or not. It's not a problem. As long as you're very clear on the interest that you represent, and that you're not lying to people. And again, lying in the bubble is a very short-term and stupid move, because someone will realize that you're lying, and the day some people realize that you're lying, you're blacklisted. So then you lose everything. So yeah, that's just how the game is played. And that's normal in the democracy again. Discussions is normal. It's back and forth information. Sometimes you are actually the two opposition. Most people don't know. No, bien sûr. Most people think that it's like, fortunately, people think that, again, lobbying is corruption. They think that lobbying is only economic interests, and they think it's corruption, which is not. Both guys, it's not. And like, again, like, and that's something that I blame NGOs for. Most people think that NGOs are not lobbyists. NGOs are lobbies. They are. A lobby is any entity that is trying to influence a decision making. Anything that falls into that is lobbying. an NGO is trying to influence decision making, they are lobbyists. Private sector is influencing decision making, that's lobbying. That's a lobby. You could even say you can do lobbying without being yourself a lobbyist. I'll give you a very concrete example. You join a demonstration. Let's say there's a reform on something. You don't like this reform, or you want something different from this reform. You participate to a public demonstration. You as an individual. On the weekend, you go demonstrate in the street for or against that reform. You are not yourself a lobbyist. That's not your job. But you are taking part in what is de facto a lobbying action, because the goal of that demonstration is to influence, one way or the other, the decision of the government. So you become yourself. You participate willingly in what is actually a lobbying tool. And lobbying will have tons of different tools. And it depends on the body. And again, like people also say, oh, NGOs are automatically public interest or general interest, and economic interest are not. That's absolutely not the case. Like NGOs, and again, that's something that I reproach them, because NGOs love to insist on the idea they're not lobbies, they're not doing lobbying, they're doing advocacy, and they are representing the general interest. NGOs do not represent the general interest. That is not their function. At best, they represent a vision, their own, of what is a public interest. They don't objectively, and they don't have the monopoly on acting in the sense of a general interest. And plus, general interest is not something that is reserved to NGOs. I'll give you, or at least by the fact that you are the format of an NGO. I'll give you two examples. Example number one. I would argue that anti-abortion organizations, which are technically NGOs, do not participate to the general interest. So I would not say that anti-abortion organizations are a general interest organization, that they act in the general interest. In their view, they may be acting in a general interest, but they're not, clearly not, the objective representation of general interest, despite the fact that they are formally an NGO. First example. Second example. Take press publishers. Press publishers are economic actors. They're in the game to make money, but you would also argue that press publishers play a very important role in the realization of a number of public interests. Access to information, freedom of opinion, freedom of information, etc., etc. So you have an economic actor that is actually playing pretty big deal when it comes to a genuine general interest. So all that to say that general interest is not something that belongs to one category of actor. It's not just NGOs. And you can have NGOs that do not represent a general interest, and you can have economic actors that also play a role in public interest. So that's also a problem with the public representation of the general representation of lobbying that are objectively wrong. Sorry, I'm just catching up. Yeah, Jamie, ask your question if you want. Go ahead. Okay, I think I catched up. Okay, cool. I take it an environmental NGOs argue that they represent public interest because without an environment, no public concern. Yeah, pretty much. That's the argument they do. That's the argument they will use, of course. But again, they represent one vision of the public interest, and you can also have a conflicting public interest. I'll give you a concrete example. The law on Sesame. So Sesame is water. Sesame is basically what's the actual it's basic children abuse. Sesame is children abuse content, like pedopornography, that sort of thing. So you have a law, an attempt at doing a law to fight against Sesame content. In there, you have two main groups that fight each other terribly. You have the Child Protection Association, and you have the Data Protection Association. They are definitely on two different sides of the debate. Child Protection Association want very strong rules against Sesame, responsabilization of platforms, access to messages, that sort of thing. Data Protection Association will tell you, fuck that. We don't want any access to anyone's data, even to fight pedopornography. Arguably, both of them defend a public interest. The defense of children's rights, fighting crimes, is a public interest. Protecting the right to a private life, equally, is a public interest. So, again, in politics, and that's a golden rule, life is not black and white. And it's extremely rare that you have to choose between an objectively good decision and an objectively bad decision. It's all about balance. Everything will have a bit of good and a bit of bad. And then it's according to your political priorities, your personal interests, etc., that you set that balance. And you will say, okay, overall, I consider that this is going in the right direction, that this balance of public interests that can be realized in many different ways by many different actors, whether economic actors or non-economic actors, this is overall going into what the position considers the general interest, the objective general interest, that as an elected representative, well, he's supposed to represent. Have I ever been tricked into doing something I did not intend to do? Tricked? No. Pushed to do something I did not want to do? Initially, yes, but it's not manipulation. Like, basically, okay, I'll tell you a story. Linked to the article that we're reading, so that's perfect segue. Okay, before I go with that, just answering quickly Jemoy question. Yes, that was perfectly legal. The EU paying Turkey, that was an agreement, so yeah, that's fully legal. So, story time. Like I said, there's an entire debate in the EU bubble on whether lobbyists should meet people from the far right. As you may have surmised, I myself am not particularly a big fan of the far right. Not exactly my cup of tea. I think I will not shock anyone by stating that. I think you may have guessed it from my position. Nonetheless, one day, we meet as part of, I go with my members and we go meet an MEP on a file that we're working together, we're pushing together on something. And we're talking about a vote that is upcoming in plenary, so it's like the final stage of something, and it's going to be a close vote. The MEP in question is from the far left. Back then, well, he was still qualified as far as, but yeah, he was belonging to GUE. That MEP told us, okay, the vote is going to be super close. We need every vote. You need to go see the far right. Because, yeah, we need the votes. So, go. And so, I ended up, at the request of a far left MEP, going to see the far right to try to get them to do something, to vote in the way we wanted to go in plenary. So I was not tricked, I was not manipulated. We said, okay, fine, we're gonna do it because we need to do it. But yeah, a politician pushed us, convinced us to do something that we didn't really want it to do in the first place. So there's no manipulation, there's no trick, because again, like an MEP that is tricking you, plenary, séance plénière, oui. So the final stage of a vote. So there was no trickery, there was no manipulation. It's just, they say, okay, we were discussing strategy, because also when you work with politicians, at some point you talk strategy. You talk strategy. When you are in agreement with the MEP, you talk strategy. Okay, what can we do to make sure that this file goes in the direction that we both want it to go? So you strategize with it. The MEP will share information with you to say, okay, I've heard this, I've heard that. You should go see that. The lobbyist will also share information with the MEP, saying, okay, I've heard this, I've heard that. So you strategize. You're part of the yeah, definitely. You're part of the political decision making. But you were working for... No, I'm not talking about when I was an assistant. I'm talking when... as a lobbyist. No, as an assistant, no, I never had to do that, no. No, I was a lobbyist then. But it's not being a gear on somebody else, is that decision making is a complicated machine, and if you want to have a decision going the way that you want, you have to move a lot of levers, and everyone plays a role in that machine. And so you're trying to have that machine go in one direction. Then Turkey did something. Well, the agreement is legal. When Turkey is accidentally letting people through, they are breaking the agreement. Of course, you can't prove it. They say, "Oh, we couldn't stop them. It's too bad." So it's not they are breaking the deal to get something in exchange. So. Yeah, that's blackmailing in a way. They're leveraging their advantage of a strange deal. It's a very pragmatic deal. Like, cynical, but pragmatic. I pay you off so that you deal with a problem that I don't want to deal with myself. Extremely cynical, extremely pragmatic. And ultimately, pretty much efficient, because that stopped, to a large extent, the flow of migrants reaching the EU through Greece. What is the concrete public interest that industrial counter the NGOs environment one with? Something more than profit? Bah, what public interest? Well, okay. I can... Let's say that you are chemical industry. You're making... what's the name of the product? Yeah. You are a maker. I know this example because I read an article that was very interesting about that. So you are a chemical industry. You make bisphenol A, which is bisphenol A, which is a chemical that is toxic. Overall, it's considered toxic. So you will have NGOs that will ask the Commission to make a law to ban bisphenol A because it's toxic. The argument that you will make to the Commission is, okay, bisphenol A is toxic, so indeed the Commission could be legitimate to ban it in some use case, or you're gonna make the arguments on to which extent, etc., etc. But you should make a number of exceptions because, as it happened, bisphenol A is necessary for certain products that are objectively good for society. I'll give you one example. Bisphenol A, I think it's bisphenol A. If it's another chemical, it doesn't matter, it's for the sake of the argument, but I think it's bisphenol A. Bisphenol A is very important if you, for one thing, that is related to blood transfusion. Voilà. That's why I think it's bisphenol. It's very important for blood transfusion because, as you know, blood transfusion pretty useful in an hospital. And you know, at least I know in France, you regularly have campaigns calling people to donate their blood because, well, you need to maintain blood stocks in hospital and everything so that they can save people with when there's an accident and everything. The pouch that contain blood, they're plastic, and bisphenol is a key product, the chemical that's actually significantly prolong the shelf life of blood. You can keep blood in storage for much longer in plastic pouch containing bisphenol A than in other things. Like before bisphenol, you were keeping blood, I think it was like in paper kind of thing, and the blood was going to waste within weeks. With blood pouch, you can keep it for months. And so the argument you're going to make is, okay, bisphenol can be toxic in some cases, but for instance, you could say, yeah, normally there would be a rule that bisphenol should never be in contact with direct contact with human, but make an exception for medical devices, because even if bisphenol is not good when it's in contact with human, the public interest of being able to maintain a healthy stock of blood bank that then will service hospital, etc., is superior to the damage that bisphenol represents. And so in that sense, the presence of bisphenol in some products participates to a public interest. And so you should give an exemption to bisphenol for medical devices, for instance. Because there's no alternative, etc., etc. That's how you could make an argument of public interest around the industry. Another interest, you say, my industry is creating tons of jobs. And yes, it's a public interest to make sure that this industry that is particularly important in this region stays viable. Another example. It is in the public interest, or more strategic interest more than public interest, but it is in strategic interest in the EU of being less dependent on China when it comes to rare earth raw materials, so that we can do electric cars, we can do solar panels, that sort of thing. That means that we must be able to open mines, lithium mines, in Europe. And of course, that means potentially damaging the environment in the area where the mine is. But that mine, despite the environmental damage it may cause locally, participates to a general interest that is deemed more important in balance. Like I said, you always balance. I don't want to do the 6-7 thing, but you always balance an interest against another, and then you look, is that balance acceptable? And that's where politics arise, because a balance that is acceptable for someone will not be acceptable to someone else, with potentially valid arguments. You can argue one way or another. Anyway, let's get back to our article. Where was I in it? We were talking about the change of strategy. That's how we did I think we did like a 30-40 minutes tunnel. It was a good tunnel, so I'm not complaining. All right, let's continue. Okay, so the change of strategy created a headache for EPP leader Manfred Weber. Although some factions within his group have pushed for closer cooperation with the far right, he has come under pressure from German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who warned that Weber knows that we do not want this cooperation and that there will be consequences if necessary. Now, Manfred Weber now bears responsibility for this, Merz added. Because of course, in Germany, AfD is still kind of toxic. So you don't want to be associated to that. Far-right forces, however, saw an opening. Rather than remain a protest movement on the parliament's fringes, far-right groups such as France National Rally, whose Jordan Bardella is the Patriots leader, Wilders PVV and Spain's Vox, united under the Patriots for Europe banner. They embraced a strategy of compromise and coalition building aimed at turning electoral gains into legislative influence. That's the big change. Few people have helped realize that shift more than others, who is tasked with turning the Patriots, which has 84 lawmakers, into a reliable partner for parliamentary majorities. The Patriots have teamed up with the EPP on tougher migration laws and environmental deregulation measures. Now their sights are set on rolling back the phase-out of combustion engine cars. There are some files where we see an opportunity where either we can steer them in the direction that we want them, or we are trying to be pragmatic by saying, if there's a left-wing majority, it will be way worse, she said. Learning how to work together required a carefully planned strategy. At first, The Patriots deliberately supported the EPP's proposal without asking for much in return to prove they could be trusted. That has 100% changed, said Ehlers. Our vote is no longer for free. So you bait the EPP by saying, oh, I'll do whatever you want. I'll sign, just to piss off the left. So you give them the habit, oh, okay, I can work with the far right actually. I can get what I want by working with the far right, and it doesn't cost me anything. And then, slowly, when they get used to getting their way by relying on the far right, say, well, now, you know, I would like that. Or that. Or I don't want that. And so you raise slowly the stakes so that you go from the position where you could not demand anything to a point where, well, actually, you can ask things. Because you got the other used to, oh, I could get what I want with the far right. And you piss off too much the other side, so the left, the liberals, and etc., so that they can't go back. And so you kind of, the objective of the far right is to kind of trap the EPP in a collaboration, and even more, to be treated as equals by the EPP. That's the objective. They want to be legitimized and be seen as, yes, we are a normal partner, and so we have to be able to get things and obtain things in exchange of from the EPP. Ehlers, who is a first-time MEP but knows the parliament well after working for 6 years for the now defunct far-right Identity and Democracy Group, which was the previous version of the far-right group, has been on the front line of the Patriots' new pragmatic strategy. She led the group in negotiations on a law aimed at ramping up deportations, one of several landmark files on which GPP joined forces with right-wing and far-right parties. For the Patriots, it would have been much easier just to vote against the return regulation, she said, as the group opposes migration policy being drawn in Brussels, believing that's a job for national capitals. But we realize, if we do not cooperate now to form this right-wing majority, the left-wing proposal that would then have a majority would be much worse. A willingness to play the Brussels political game is unusual for a group made up of ideologically diverse nationalist parties, united mainly by their desire to repatriate powers from Brussels to capitals, and which have traditionally shown little interest in working in the EU institutions. Yeah, he's very tall. Ehlers is very tall. He's like 190 or something like that. Yet Ehlers pushed back against the idea that the far-right camp's strategy to Brussels has changed. We are now the third largest group, and so we can actually change things, and so the pragmatism, I think, would have always been there also in earlier groups, had the opportunity been there to participate. The EPP says there is no structured alliance or coordination with the Patriots, insisting that far-right groups support its position without any quid pro quo. Basically, it's not our fault. It's not our fault if the far-right happens to vote exactly for the things that we want. I'm not cooperating. Absolutely not. I would never dare. Non, monsieur. Bon. In reality, not so much. In reality, yeah, they are on some topics. Yeah, they are actively coordinating together. I mean, recently, like on that law about return policy, it was really, and that's why Merz was pissed off at Weber. That you had a group chat between staff of the EPP, assistants of Bellamy, French EPP MEP, and the staff of far-right groups, where they were actively negotiating and coordinating to get that through. So when the EPP says there is no coordination with the far right, that's absolute bullshit. Like the whole arguments relies on this word, structured. That's the only thing, like the structured is like basically bearing the entire thing. In the sense that, yes, indeed, there is no formal alliance between the Patriots and the EPP. That's true. Bon, beyond that, there is active coordination and de facto alliance between the EPP and the Patriots on some topics. Because the EPP is using that to screw over the socialists and the liberals. And so yeah, Ehlers reject this argument that the far right is not in alliance and does it for free. If they think people believe that, they are extremely naive, she said, and she's perfectly right. Nobody is buying that argument. Ehlers cited the EU's deportations law as an example, saying the EPP adopted several demands from the Patriots and the other far-right groups in the parliament, the ESN, where you have the AfD. They, the EPP, were literally waiting for me to give the green light from the Patriots that each and every one of our delegations would support because we needed every single vote, said Ehlers. The EPP's position is that they want to keep working with the Social Democrats and the Liberals of Renew, but they will not shy away from relying on far-right votes to deliver their programs. Saying, oh, I promised voters that I would fight against migration, the socialists do not want, well then I don't have a choice but to work with the far right. On the deportation bills, EPP spokesperson Daniel Koester said in November, it is a lie that they negotiated with the Patriots. Magically compromised occurs out of thin air, where the entirety of the Patriots fell behind that. Magic. Unlike traditional whips, who enforce party discipline through incentives and penalties, Ehlers' job is to identify issues on which the Patriots' diverse national delegations can unite, from amendments to law to plenary resolutions. And that's also a particularity of the far right, or depends also the political groups, is that political groups are coordinated in very different manners depending on what they are. The EPP is a very, very structured and very coordinated group. The EPP is always trying, and in most of the time succeeding, in defining a common line. There will be ideological and political coordination and structuration to ensure that everybody is pushing in the same direction on every fight. The position is united. There's uniformity, homogeneity among the group. On the other side, you have groups, traditionally like the far right, that are more what we call technical groups. They are together because they have some basic commonalities, but then everybody does what they want. Typically, far right, far left, it's that. The power lies not in the group, but in the national delegations. By default, it's not the group that is imposing a line on the national delegations. National delegations do what the fuck they want. If the other are okay with it, good for them. If they don't, who cares? And so there, it's not in their culture to have like a strong coordination and strong unity on files. And so Ehlers, her job is to find a few topics on which there can be a common position, a coordinated common position of the Patriots, because strategically it fits everyone. While in DPP, that's the basic, like that's the common system. You work as a group. You work as a pack. Delegations can still have their own autonomy, but in practice, most of the time they align on the group line. So you have different group culture depending on where you are. Another key part of a rule is counting how many lawmakers in the group can support certain legislative text and then relaying that information to the other groups for coalition building. If we want them to be willing to cooperate with us, we also need to be reliable in terms of the vote that we deliver, she said. You go see the APP, you say, okay, I can bring 50 votes. And if you can deliver those 50 votes, you're seen as reliable. You did not overpromise. The far-right firewall is effectively gone in some parliament committees, she said, naming the Constitutional Affairs and Civil Rights committees. Ultimately, it's all about the individuals and whether they get along. And there I also agree, depending on the committee you are in, the firewall, the cordon sanitaire, works or doesn't work. She quotes two examples: Constitutional Affairs and Civil Rights, and the Libe Committee, the Civil Liberties Committee. Our Constitutional Affairs, I still have some doubts. Like on some topics, yes. Like Constitutional Affairs is everything that deals with EU treaties, but also rules about lobbying, that sort of thing. And there, the far-right and the EPP have, in the Constitutional Affairs Committee, a common line on NGOs. They want to hit on NGOs, so they work together on this, no doubt. Bon, then on the treaties, not so much, because the EPP is very much pro-European, where the far-right is not pro-European, so they're not working together on that. On the Civil Liberty Committee, that's the committee that deals with migration. Yeah, of course, the EPP is working on a daily basis with the far right. That's the bread and butter. But in other committees, the culture committee, far right does not work with the EPP. The EPP has no interest in working with them. They don't have the common line or whatever. So the far right is completely excluded. So it's very much committee by committee, and also sometimes people by people. If you have high-level MEPs in that committee that are very attached to the cordon sanitaire, they will not work with the far right. Well, if someone doesn't give a shit, well, maybe they will. In the end, isn't the parliament the echo chamber of national parliaments, where the far right is more worked with? Not necessarily an echo chamber. I mean, the European Parliament can sometimes reflect national dynamics, but it's not like an echo chamber of national parliaments. Like it's not it's not relaying what's happening in national parliament, because it's different culture, etc., different political settings and everything. But I would say, I mean, it is ultimately affected by what's happening in national parliaments. The cordon sanitaire in the European Parliament is damaged because of the size of the far right now in the parliament, and because in more and more countries it is deemed as acceptable to work with the far right. So it reflects some practices that first emerge in national parliaments, but it's not just the repeat. It's not just repeating what's happening in national parliament. Like the European Parliament has its own thing ongoing. Like it's sometimes different. Like for instance, Manfred Weber, German, actively organized a strategy of working with the far right. In Germany, it's not really seen as acceptable at all for the CDU, CSU to work with the AfD in the Bundestag. That would never fly, and that's why Merz was pissed off at Manfred. So it's different dynamics as well. Okay. It depends on who the EPP sends as a negotiator, it depends on who the Patriots send as a negotiator, and the personal relations, she said. Heller says she is open to talk to any party, and said that behind the scenes, where there's no cameras and no journalists, the Social Democrats and Patriots actually agree on some policy positions, but that publicly the center-left refuses to collaborate, even if there's agreements on substance. But we're starting, at least on a personal level, to see some changes in that as well. The SND has repeatedly refused to open up to the Patriots and has asked the EPP not to count on far-right votes and negotiate with them and the Liberals instead. In the long term, Heller hopes a right-wing majority can become the norm and even lead the Council and Commission, starting a process to trim the EU's competencies and scale back Brussels' power. So ultimately, they want to replace the pro-European majority by the EPP plus far-right majority as the default. The 2029 EU election, she said, could be the point, I think, where it could sway in that direction. And then the far-right would win the cultural battle versus the pro-European, as the EPP would then maybe not become a satellite, but mostly adapt to the worldview of the far-right. Any questions on this or on anything else, as it was the final article? EPP states for European Popular Party. Popular People's Party. In Austria, the FPO was the biggest party after the last election. They were approached to form a coalition and proved impossible to work with. They were not. Yeah, I mean, it depends. The left is indeed la gauche, but I call them GUE to avoid like confusion because I mean actually they call the left, but they're actually the far left. So I call them GUE to avoid confusion when I say okay. If I talk about the left, the people don't get confused. Are we talking about the left in general? Are we talking about the socialists? Are we talking about GUE? So I always say GUE to GUE, G-U-E. That's the second part of the name. Like the full name is the left / GUE, NGL. I pronounce that the French way. I mean, not even the French way. In Parliament, I always heard it, even in English, pronounced GUE. But yeah, so in Parliament, you have going from far right to far left. So ESN, Europeans Sovereign. Shit, I'm so used to the bloody acronyms. What's the N standing for? God damn it. ESN. Parliament. Europe, a sovereign nation. Okay. So ESN, so that's where you find Zemmour, that's where you find AfD. Patriots, that's where you find Rassemblement National, Fidesz. ECR, that's where you find Giorgia Meloni, that's where you find the Polish PiS. It's a bit of ECR is a bit of a schizophrenic group between the radical right and the far right. Then you have the EPP, which is a center-right conservative. You have Renew, so the liberals. Then the SND, the socialists. Greens, and then to finish, GUE, which is the far left. And you also have like the non-attached, so those who don't have a political group. And the interesting bit is that, so the political groups are created at the beginning of the mandate, and usually at mid-mandate, so after 2 years and a half, there's a huge mercato. where political groups are trying to steal MEPs from each other to become bigger or even to eliminate a group. Because to become a political group in the parliament, you need to have a minimum number of MEP coming from a minimum number of... I think it's... I never remember if it's 21 or 27 MEPs coming from 7 countries. And and if a group falls below that, it ceases to exist. And so admin mandates, groups try to steal members from each other to become a bit bigger, and potentially that can be dangerous for some groups, because if they go below either the threshold of MPs or the threshold of nationalities, that could be dead for them. Let me check something quickly. Yeah. You're right. GUE is the French acronym. Like they introduce it like they include the French word in it, in the acronym. So the full name is the left in the European Parliament, GUE NGL, GUE being Gauche Unitaire Européenne, and NGL being Nordic Green Left. Because historically in GUE you had you always had a strong French. You had the French Communists, you had LFI, etc. So it was always a strong delegation. Like I mean, the far left, it's mostly Western and Southern Europe. No, the acronym are whatever you decide. It's the official, like the organization chooses its own name and an acronym. So if they decide to put a French acronym, they can put a French acronym. It's more practice. Like most people call them GUE without necessarily knowing that it's a French acronym. And you just get used to it. Like even myself, I will use the English acronym over the French one in many cases. Like ECR, it's the English acronym. The French one would be CRE. I've never seen anyone using even among French, using the CRE acronym. Everyone says ECR. While on the contrary, in French we say PPE. So what was the Radical Right Party? Well, ECR. ECR, it's a mix because it's a schizophrenic group. You have the half of it that is, I would say, kind of radical right or ultra-conservative right, which is Eurosceptic without necessarily being racist or very far right. And then, so those are like the class, those who used to be with the Brits pre-Brexit. And then you have the second half that is full on far right, the Polish peace, typically. So they're kind of they're within the same group, but they're a bit schizophrenic. And technically, radical left, GUE has a mix of radical left and far left, but for the sake of simplicity, I say globally far left for GUE. I can wait. All right. If there's no more question, oh shit, I will maybe finally have dinner at some point. All right. So hope that you like today's content and the tunnels. You learn stuff, I hope. Yeah, go ahead. Final question. Final question for you, Jamoy. In the meantime, I do the pro. What makes a left party radical in your... Oh, okay. There we're going into the sociology of political science. Technically, there is a difference between radical left and far left. Technically, in political science, far left corresponds to parties that do not believe in democratic processes as a mean to achieve the end of capitalism, etc. Etc. Like they are like the classic. Only the revolution works. The revolution is the way by which the people will get rid of capitalism, etc., etc. So technically, from a political science point of view, far left are parties that do not. No, radical is not that. Far left is extrême gauche. That's radical, but radical left still does not believe, still believes in democratic processes. They will still try to seek power through elections, even if they want to challenge deeply the system and everything. But the key difference between radical left and far left, radical left still believes in conquering power through democratic means. Far left doesn't believe in the legitimacy of election and believes that only the popular revolution will lead to that. But having said that, far left parties will participate in elections, not because they believe in it as a mean to conquer power, but out of pragmatism to use that as publicity. So if we were to use a French example, NPA, Révolution Permanente, they do not believe into elections as a mean to conquer power to achieve the revolution, blah, 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 but they will still present candidates, notably at the French presidential election, because out of pragmatism, they consider that it gives them a visibility to push their program and then acquire the potential popular support to one day achieve the revolution. That's why LFI hates being qualified as far left. They say, no, we are radical left, because they technically belong to, they believe in conquering power through the election and not through revolution. And because they consider that far left has a negative connotation. And on the difference between radical right and far right, I can't give you the answer. I don't know the detailed nuance between radical right, in political science, in actual political science. I don't recall the exact difference between a far right party and a radical right party. I don't know if it's I couldn't say at this stage. I will need to look it up. Anyway, Let's do the program and then let's go eat. Program for the rest of the week. Next time I see you, Friday at 5 for the news review in French, as usual. Next week, we have a slightly different schedule because I'm out of town for part of the week. So we will do the news review in English on the Wednesday, so Wednesday at 7, and the French news review on the Friday at 5, as usual. So that's it. I hope that you enjoyed today's content. As usual, if you have a Prime lying around, do toss a coin to your streamer. That's always appreciated. I'll have the link to the social media as usual. And on this note, I wish you all a good evening, and I hope to see you either on Friday in French or next week for new adventures. Bye everyone. Have a good one. See ya.